As we have a quorum of 4 members, I wish to call the meeting to order. The Chairman has given notice that he is unavoidably absent from this meeting. In this case, according to Dolan standing orders, the committee must proceed at once to elect one of its members as acting chairman. I now invite nominations for the position of acting chairman.
I'd like to propose Senator Poddy-Coffey, please.
Poddy-Coffey, thank you. Are there any other nominations? Second proposal. I will now put the question. The question is that Senator Coffey be elected acting chairman. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed. I call upon Senator Coffey to take the chair.
Thank you, colleagues. We'll get the meeting underway. Delighted to step in as acting chairman. Our colleague, Deputy Joe Carey, chair, is actually on Oireachtas business in the UK with the British-Irish parliamentary delegation. So we'll happily step in. Just some notices first. I remind members, staff and witnesses that those in the public gallery to turn off their mobile phones or switch them to flight mode. Mobile phones interfere with the sound system and make it difficult for the parliamentary reporters to report the meeting, and also television, radio, web streaming and IPTV coverage of this meeting can and will be adversely affected by mobile phones. So please take a moment now just to check your phones are off. So we'll move on to the business of the committee. The purpose of today's meeting is to engage with officials from the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport to consider the matter of regional and rural transport policy. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to our witnesses, Ms Deirdre Hanlon, Assistant Secretary, Public Transport, Sustainability and Climate Change, Mr Kevin Doyle, Principal, Public Transport, Corporate and Services, Mr Garrett Ducey, Principal, Public Transport Investment, and Mr Dominic Milani, Principal Advisor regarding roads. So it is also proposed that we will take opening statements and that any other documents supplied by the witnesses to the committee be published on the committee's website after the meeting. Is that agreed? Agreed. Following the public session, then we will have a short private session. Is that agreed? Agreed. I just want to read the formal notices for the information of our witnesses. Regarding privilege, I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act of 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the Chair to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name, or in such a way as to make him or her or it identifiable. I also wish to advise you that any submissions or opening statements or other documents that you have supplied to the committee will be published on the committee's website after this meeting. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. So now, to start the debate, I would like to call on Ms Deirdre Hanlon to make her opening statement.
Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to present this opening statement on behalf of the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport. The Department has been invited here this evening by the committee to answer questions in relation to transport policy in rural and regional areas and to assist the committee in its consideration of these matters. I'm joined by some of my colleagues from the Department, where we all work across the land transport area. Mr Kevin Doyle and Mr Garrett Ducey each deal with matters of public transport policy, and Mr Dominic Milani deals with matters of roads policy. The committee has already had several discussions about rural and regional transport and will be aware that there are many actors in the transport arena in Ireland. In addition to this, over the last decade, there have been several changes in the way that public transport is organised and the way in which it's governed. So, against this backdrop, I thought it might be useful to the committee if I were to start off by briefly outlining how some of the state institutions within the public transport area, how they're organised, and give you a summary of the respective roles of those state bodies, including obviously ourselves. So, turning first to ourselves, as the committee will be aware, the Minister and the Department have responsibility in relation to three overarching themes. These are policy and statutory frameworks, aggregate funding, and corporate governance in the state transport bodies, and also a shareholder role there. In fulfilling these responsibilities, we work on a number of fronts. We develop transport policy and also provide a transport perspective and input where other relevant government policies are being devised. We develop the statutory and legislative frameworks to govern the transport sector, and these often you will see as they come to the houses of the Oireachtas to be promulgated into law or as policy statements. Through our vote, we channel aggregate exchequer funding for the transport sector. The Department's total voted allocation this year in 2018 is in around €2 billion, and 1.6 of this relates just to the land transport area. Committee members might be interested to know that a piece of analysis that was conducted a few years ago under the auspices of the Department indicated that well over 3/4 of the spend at the time on land transport was occurring outside of the Greater Dublin area. For the public transport area, and that's bus and rail, the funding from the Department flows mainly to the National Transport Authority, and it's for infrastructure investment and for public transport service support. For the roads investment that the Department supports, the funding flows from the Department to Transport Infrastructure Ireland, which is one of our state bodies, and to the relevant local authorities. Committee members will be aware that during the years of the fiscal and economic crisis which followed on from the banking crisis of 2008, many areas of government expenditure were reduced in order for the state to regain fiscal stability. In the transport area, this curtailment affected both current and capital budgets that were available to support services and to invest in infrastructure. It impacted on roads and on public transport. At the time, the Department undertook an analysis so as to advise Government and the Minister on how best we could prioritise transport capital investment within these circumstances. And the approach adopted was published in 2015 in a document that we call the SFILT report, the Strategic Framework for Investment in Land Transport. And ultimately that came up with one very clear conclusion, which was that the key priority had to be for the funding that we have to really direct it in maintaining the existing very extensive networks that we have across both road and rail networks throughout the country, in order that they would remain operational and that they would remain safe. There were some lower order priorities, but that was identified as the number one. So since then, it has been a priority to return to the levels of maintenance and safety investment required to keep the networks at what we call a steady state of service and reliability. The annual budget allocations have happily been increasing over more recent years, and they are scheduled and profiled to rise further over the coming periods ahead. And this is enabling us to regain and achieve what we call the steady state investment level. And together with that, we are also enabled to undertake a number of targeted new projects under the National Development Plan and in line with the strategic objectives that have been agreed by Government in the National Planning Framework. Finally, in our role as a department, we also oversee the corporate sector in the state bodies involved with transport, and we exercise a shareholder role on behalf of the Minister in relation to the state-owned service providers, CIE, and its subsidiaries. Now, another significant actor in the sector whom you've already met in recent months is the National Transport Authority. The NTA, it's a relatively new body on the transport scene. It was established in around 10 years ago under legislation that was passed by the Oireachtas, and it acts as an independent body with regulatory, funding and strategic development roles. And it has a considerable role now in relation to the public transport sector in Ireland. Among its statutory functions, as you'll be aware, the NTA is responsible for regulating and contracting all PSO bus and rail services in the state. They allocate the PSO funding to the operators in accordance with their contracts. They licence and regulate commercial bus services. There are services that can be run on a profitable basis and don't require public subvention support. They regulate taxi services throughout the country, and they do things like developing integrated ticketing and some strategic transport planning. So Transport Infrastructure Ireland then is another body under the aegis of the department. Their main function is around infrastructure and providing an integrated approach to the future development and operation both of the national roads network and also in relation to light rail infrastructure in the country. There's another body that I want to mention because they have a really vital role, although they probably don't come up for mention as often. It's the Commission for Railway Regulation. They were set up by the Oireachtas under 2005 legislation, and these are the national body that have responsibility for oversight and authorisations in relation to the very important area of rail safety. And they also, in more recent years, have a role in relation to some economic aspects of the running of railways and facilitating market access. In many respects, when you look at our national regulatory framework for public transport, it reflects EU law that applies across all member states, and therefore, like other member states, Ireland now has independent transport-focused authorities that are responsible for matters such as the allocation of funding and licensing. These are roles done by NTA, and things like the oversight of safety, which are done by the CRR. And these are functions that in previous years, going back some decades, would all have been exercised under the ambit of the department. Probably the most visible set of actors in the state sector in dealing with public transport are the long-standing Córas Umpire CIE and its three operating subsidiaries, Bus Áclia in Dublin, Bus Éamon operating throughout the country, and Éamon operating the rail service throughout the country. Why are they visible? Because these are the companies that actually provide the services to the passenger. They're the ones out there that the passenger can see on a daily basis and with whom passengers and many of us identify. The companies are responsible for running all of their services, for making decisions about how they operate them, and they also decide on strategy and operations in relation to the commercial aspects that they run of their operations. Now, what I've described are the state operators in the sector. Obviously, there are many non-state participants in the sector, the obvious one being the passengers, but among the service providers there's a lot of private firms, there's a lot of community bodies that are involved in transport provision, and they do this under relevant regulatory licence or funding arrangements with the National Transport Authority. This committee obviously is primarily concerned today in transport matters that affect rural areas and regional travel, and in relation to the work of the Minister and the Department, the elements within our remit for policy development and for overall aggregate transport funding are probably the most relevant to the context of support for transport in rural and regional areas. Members of the committee will probably be aware that on the policy front, the programme for a partnership government, which is the government's programme that's it's running over the lifetime of the government, has a number of commitments that are relevant to what we're talking about today and the public transport area in particular. One of the commitments I'm sure that the committee is very interested in is that to look at how best to improve the integration of services in the rural transport network within regions and to provide a report on this to the Oireachtas committees. The matter is being examined and developed by the Department, and the way we're doing it is in the context of a broader piece of work that we have underway, which is to review public transport policy more generally, and to do it as a strand of that. And that review of public transport policy is another commitment in the programme for government, which asks us to ensure that services are sustainable into the future and are meeting the needs of a modern economy. As a key part of this policy review process, you may be aware that the Minister last May hosted a roundtable discussion involving a very broad range of organisations and individuals who are closely linked to the public transport sector. Specifically in relation to rural transport, these included representatives of the Rural Transport Network and Irish Rural Link. The purpose of the roundtable was to give all of the participants the opportunity to come and to outline their perspectives on key public transport policy issues, and equally to make sure that everybody was in the room at the one time so that everybody could hear the perspectives of others as well, and to engage in a dialogue about the challenges of achieving appropriate policy balances. The discussions, the papers, the presentations that were made at that event, they're forming the basis of a public consultation that we're planning to undertake very shortly. The public consultation is going to feed into the work that the Department is doing on reviewing public transport policy, including obviously the rural transport dimension, and we hope the upshot of that will be the development of a public transport policy statement. Against this work specifically on transport policy review is taking place against another piece of work in which we were heavily involved, which is a noticeable policy development that I suppose came to some fruition earlier this year, which was the recently agreed Project 2040 plan. It was developed in a cross-government initiative led by the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, and involving departments across government and ministers, including ourselves. Earlier this year, it was published, and it comprises two elements. First, there's a new national planning framework. That sets the vision, the policy direction in which government sees Ireland developing over the next 20 or 25 years, thereabouts. And together, alongside that, there's a new capital development plan, which is, I suppose, the strategic capital investment plan for infrastructure for the first 10 years of the longer-term vision statement. It's a key element. Transport is a key element of national infrastructure. It's a critical component of how we plan for the country's future development. Therefore, transport features strongly in Project 2040, but equally Project 2040 is going to influence and shape how we develop transport over the next number of years as well. The Exchequer provides considerable funding for public transport, and it includes subvention support, which is provided via the National Transport Authority. That goes for the PSO operations of Bus Éireann and Éireann both of which have very substantial operations and services across rural Ireland and in relation to regional connectivity. And it also provides investment for their infrastructure. The Exchequer funding also supports the Rural Transport Programme, which obviously is specific to rural areas, and that's aimed at addressing issues of social isolation through providing a public transport service that's very much tailored to local needs. This funding also is channelled via the NTA, and that body has, since 2012, had national responsibility for integrated local and rural transport, including management of this rural transport programme. You'll probably be more familiar with it now under the new branding of the rural transport programme, which is the Local Link brand. The delivery of demand responsive transport services has been and remains the cornerstone of the Local Link programme. But there has, in tandem with this, been an increase in focus on trying to provide some regular commuter services. This has occurred since 2016, and it responds to identified local demands that have cropped up over the course of the delivery of the Local Link programme. These scheduled services are high-frequency services. They run a number of days a week, 5, 6, 7 days, depending on where they are. And they're designed to facilitate regular access to education, to employment, to healthcare, in addition to recreational opportunities. Key features of it include the connectivity with other public transport services and better linkage of services between and within towns and villages across Ireland. The NTA tells us that since 2016, when they moved towards opening scheduled services under the RTP, 60 such regular rural services have been introduced into the network, which is managed by the Rural Link offices. One of the priority areas under the National Planning Framework is the essential requirement to enhance and upgrade accessibility between urban areas of population and their regions and hinterlands, in parallel with trying to initiate a development of more compact growth within urban areas. Compact growth, improved public transport and decarbonisation of car journeys, they're all necessary elements of our transition to a low-carbon future. Another major objective of the framework is to make substantial progress in linking our regions and our urban areas, not just linking them to Dublin, but linking them with each other and linking them with local areas of significant interest. Project 2040 recognises that significant investment in public transport will be required to accommodate change and growth, and also providing more choice for the travelling public and improving the quality of people's lives. The plan builds on this investment. In June, the Minister and Minister of State at the Department launched Linking People and Places, which involves investment of 8.6 billion specifically for public transport. And the aim is to link more people and more places, pretty much what it says in the title, while also improving the quality of life, easing congestion in our cities and doing our part to deliver a low-carbon society. New major public transport programmes to be delivered under the NDP will be fully accessible for people with disabilities. And this has been done just as part of the normal design. This is how projects are designed nowadays, that you design for accessibility. And in tandem with that, there will be continued investment programme to try to retrofit the existing older public transport facilities to enhance their accessibility features. One of the flagship investments that will be delivered within Project 2040 and the 10-year NDP horizon is Bus Connects. This will apply in Ireland's cities. It's going to commence rollout in Dublin, and it will be followed by the other major cities, and starting with Galway. It's a key investment priority for public transport. It will address congestion in the short to medium term, and therefore is very much a key project that we wish to see developed. The programme of Bus Connects in the regional cities will include new bus fleets, bus lanes with segregated cycling, revised bus service networks and park and ride facilities. So the objective is to deliver a bus system that will enable more people to travel by bus than ever before, to make the bus an attractive option and to allow bus commuting to become a viable choice for employees, for students, for shoppers, for visitors. The funding priority that we have in the NDP and the planning framework for the interurban rail network is to protect the investment that has already been made over considerable decades in the development of our railway system, by funding maintenance and safety projects that are needed so as to maintain safety and service levels across all rail operations in the state. Just turning briefly to the roadside, the sheer scale of Ireland's road network tends not to be that well known. We have a combined length of 100,000 kilometres of road. If you look at it in EU terms, it's twice the norm for EU on a per capita basis. The road network really is the workhorse of our economic and social infrastructure throughout the country. Most of our freight is carried on it, all of our bus services rely on it, and the people of Ireland rely on that road network in order to link regional and local areas and to connect communities. So maintaining and renewing the road network is recognised in the NDP as being of critical importance. Within available budgets, both Transport Infrastructure Ireland, that's TII, and the Department are very focused on maintaining the network in as serviceable a condition as possible. In the case of regional and local roads, the main grant programmes operated by the Department are targeted at specific policy objectives. For example, one of these is pavement sealing, and that's to protect the surface of the road from water damage. And another one then is what we call road strengthening. And this is based on a condition rating of the road, and its aim is to lengthen the life of road pavements. These grants, which are intended to supplement the local authority's own resources, are allocated on the length of the road network within a local area of responsibility. And the reason it's done that way is it's seen as being the fairest and most equitable basis for allocation. The committee might be interested to note that the Department's grant funding for regional and local roads is principally directed to local authorities outside of Dublin. This reflects the fact that since the revision of the arrangements for the retention of local property tax, which was done in 2015, the Dublin councils no longer receive any grant assistance from the Department under the main road categories. In addition to substantial support for the maintenance of the road network, the NDP also lists 23 new national road schemes. They're either already at planning or design stage or construction stages, and these would include things like the strategic road link between Cork and Limerick. At a regional and local level, there's another 13 significant road improvement projects that are currently being advanced under the NDP. All of these schemes together will better link local communities, they'll reduce congestion, and they will contribute to the local economies and society of their areas. Work is also underway on appraisal and early planning work related to a pipeline of road projects that have been identified as suitable for future development. Can I conclude, Chairman, saying overall what the Department does is it works on providing the general policy context for all transport in Ireland. This includes land transport in rural Ireland and connectivity within and between regions. The road network and the public transport networks, both of these are integral to this work, and they each receive very substantial levels of support from the state each year. This support is set to continue into the foreseeable future and indeed be greatly enhanced, and it is closely linked to the key outcomes that have been identified by Government in its Project 2040 development plan and investment strategy. We hope that this evening we can assist the committee in its deliberations. We're here to explain and discuss the policy context for land transport in Ireland. Also, as mentioned earlier in the statement, we are currently embarked on reviewing public transport generally, including rural transport. So we would hope that in the course of the discussions this evening, we'd learn from the committee, get to hear the committee's views, and be able to take those views and experience to help inform the work that we are doing in relation to our own policy review. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr Hanlon, for a wide-ranging and comprehensive opening statement. So now we'll open it to members to ask some questions, and every member is actually offering. So what I'm going to do is take 3 members at a time. I know, a lot of us will have similar concerns and questions, so in the interest of efficiency. So I'll first call on Deputy Cuív, followed by Senator Hopkins, and then Deputy Collins.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for coming here today. And I've read your script carefully, and it's clear yours is an overall policy remit, not choosing a specific thing here or there, where it's meant to be about policy. Now, I'll try to keep to that. So, the first issue I'd like to ask you about is, has the Department a policy in relation to public transport fares to ensure that there is an evidence base to them and that there's equality in terms of rural fares and urban fares, and that we get away from what I thought was a most extraordinary statement I got from the NTA dated the 16th of October. As is common practice internationally, different fares apply in city areas reflecting the different operation characteristics in those areas as opposed to rural areas. I don't care what they do internationally. I don't live internationally. I live here. And I don't care what irrational policies they have anywhere else. I like to see Irish policies being rational. Now here's my question. Is there a policy to get rid of, I'll just give you one simple example, just an example, but this is happening all over the country. If you take the train to Sallins, that's considered urban. That's half the cost of taking the train to Newbridge. That's considered rural. So for going the extra station, you suddenly double the fare. And when you ask the NTA or you ask all these great authorities, you just say, well, that's the way it was, that's the way it is, and that's the way it'll be forever, amen. No, there's no rationality to that. If you take the bus, for example, on an expressway route, you can get to Dublin for, what, €17 or something, €20. If you take the bus back to Carrow, it's something like the same thing. So, is there a policy? And I don't want to be fobbed off the NTA decide this. I want to know, does the Minister have a policy on laying down to NTA, all fares should be rational, all fares should have approximately the same rationale behind them, and you can't suddenly double the rate per kilometre just because you got another 3 miles down the road. That's my first question. The second question I have, this is particularly in relation to NTA's policy on i.e. Éamon. Is there a policy from the Minister to lay down that Éamon must do what it's meant to do, provide on the railway lines that exist and that they own efficient national services and not just concentrate on a few lines? Now, can I ask another question? From study I've done, it would appear there's a clear relationship between frequency, fares, timetabling and journey distance, and when you put all those factors together, you get the passengers. Have you looked at this on, I've looked at it on a spot basis, have you looked at this on a national basis and said, actually there's massive latent potential, but we're not realising it because we don't have those 4 factors put together? I'll just give an example. Athenry to Galway has a very frequent service now because you've got the Limerick trains that you've got. So I think it's 399 people are going from Athenry into Galway City every day on the train and back out again. Now, if you compare that to Clonmel to Waterford, you'll find that virtually nobody's going on that train, even though Athenry has a population of 3,950 and the population of Waterford is 17,140. So you'd think you'd be getting 4 times the number, over 1,000. Only snag is as
50,000 just.
Huh?
Waterford City.
No, but Clonmel to
Clonmel,
Waterford.
sorry, I said Waterford, yeah.
No, but I think Clonmel to Waterford.
Yeah, okay.
Right? Clonmel to Waterford has 4 times the population. But as the chair knows, there's nobody going on the train. Well, not surprising, because the commuter time for that train is you get on the train at 10:38 and you arrive at work at 11:29 and you leave at 7:45 in the evening and you get home at 9:15. So what I want to know is, have you done a study as to are things failing, or what's the potential, put it in the positive way, what's the potential out there if we get my 4 parameters in a row, when you see a very small town like Athenry getting these numbers, and I think you'll find similar things on the East Coast where you have all these very frequent trains into Dublin. Now, I'm also, just 2 very quick questions because I don't want to hug the meeting. Have you or are you developing a commuter rail policy in line with the spatial strategy, because not everybody is going to live in your dense houses. Forget that dream. That's a long-time dream, the Department of Transport, but ain't going to happen. People don't do what you want them to do. They do what they want to do. So if they want to live in Tuam, they live in Tuam. If they want to live in Clonny-the-Bonk, they live in Clonny-the-Bonk. That's just the way it is. And you just have to get used to it. But allowing that I'm right and that that's what people will really do, have you a plan to develop commuter policy, and I'm focusing all the time on policy, commuter policies into the cities of Galway, Waterford, Cork and Limerick, along the existing rail net, including open and closed railway lines? Semi-open, there's 3 classes of railway line. Open, semi-open. I count Nina to Limerick semi-open. I count Limerick Junction to Waterford semi-open. And real open railway lines. Is there a policy, or are you developing a policy? And the final one, there's a little known provision in law in rural areas for rural hackneys, PSOV vehicles. Nearly impossible to get it. 2 questions. 1, can you tell me how many of those are licensed around the country, have active licence at the moment? I got the answer before. It's literally minuscule. And secondly, is it intended to review all of that to ensure that there will be a public service vehicle attractive arrangement in every small country area, particularly since your Minister was very diligent in the Road Traffic Act, and I'm absolutely against drunk driving, absolutely against it. Wish we could do something about the people who are 5 times over the limit, but I'm absolutely against it. But if you want to go out for a meal or something in a rural area, there's no way getting home, 4 or 5 miles. And when you try to get these local PSVs in, what you're told is, well, there's 5 taxi licences there, but of course they're working in the city. They're not confined to the area and they're not available when you need them. So are you going to review that? And would you look, policy-wise, at introducing a local-based licence that you'd either have to pick the person up or deliver the person within a certain radius, that would be for new entrants, that would be attractive and would fill a very, very big black hole in terms of services that urban people take for granted?
Thank you, Deputy. I'll ask our witnesses to note those questions and hold for them, and I'll call on Senator Hopkins next, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Just a number of questions, really. One is in relation to the road network. Coming from the west, I suppose we have huge concerns in terms of the real need to develop a fit-for-purpose road network. I live very near the N5, and we all know the challenges in terms of the need for an upgrade of the N5 and an upgrade of the N4. I suppose when we look at the map of Ireland currently, we have very little motorway access north of the M6. So really it's to ask around that policy to support the development of road infrastructure in the west of Ireland. I know that work is ongoing in relation to the N5 and the N4, but it can never happen fast enough. I suppose we need to have a fit-for-purpose road infrastructure in order to facilitate individuals and facilitate business. It's absolutely critical. That's my first question. My second question is in relation to, and it goes back to what Deputy Cuív mentioned in relation to timetabling. I took the train from Castlereagh to Dublin this morning, but if I'm to get it home this evening, the last train leaves at 6:15. And, you know, the reality is we are living in changing times. Many people do commute. Many people need to commute. Many people would use public transport if it was timetabled in a way to meet their needs. And I do think that the department need to take a more active role in terms of facilitating greater, I suppose, efficiency in terms of timetabling to meet those needs. I mean, Deputy Cuív mentioned another example. I'm mentioning this example, so we're not talking in isolation here. There are challenges in terms of trying to meet the needs of people, particularly people who, obviously we want to create employment in rural areas, but we need to deal in reality as well. Many people do commute. The third point is just to, I suppose, emphasise the importance of the local link and the improvements that have happened with regard to the local link infrastructure. I just know myself, I was in a school last week in Tulsk, and it has been very beneficial in terms of the local link bus service, bringing children from that school to an after school childcare centre. So that's just one example of where the local link service is trying to support families and also link, I suppose I have other examples where it links with bus services and links with towns. And I think certainly as the service develops, more people will use it. So I certainly think improvements have been made in that sphere. I just asked specifically in terms of the train services and the road network. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And
can I just mention
yeah,
one more thing? Just reading through the document, I suppose just what you've mentioned there, that there has been roundtable discussions and it will result in this public transport policy statement. I'm a practical person. I want to know what that means. What will that mean? You've said there's a particular emphasis on rural areas. What will that mean for people living in rural areas? How will that translate? How will that deliver better services for people who live in rural areas?
Thank you, Senator. I call Deputy Michael Collins.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation that you made to us this evening. Just a few issues of concern. I'd love to talk about rail, but there's no rail in Cork, West Cork in here, west of Cork City, unfortunately. So it's something that I can't really elaborate, and I can't talk about the earliness or the lateness of it because we don't have it. It's sort of very unfortunate. But what I will say is that we spoke at Bus Éireann here before, and the indication they gave me was that they were going to link bus services with rail from Cork. That hasn't, from what I gather, hasn't happened. And have you any indication of this happening going forward? So that the fact is, it looks like there will never be rail coming into places like Bandon or Clonakilty or into West Cork. But if they don't, why isn't there a bus service linking West Cork to rail every morning, so that keep to help for workers and help cut down on the obviously people travelling to and from work with their own cars. Another thing, I suppose, is the fares and the cost of it in rural communities. And I hear from a lot of young people, obviously, that are in college and they're going to the cities and they're finding that the fares are much cheaper than they are down in rural parts back in West Cork in particular. And I was talking to one operator yesterday, Damien Long in Skibbereen, and he's willing to put forward a service from West Cork to take people to the city early in the morning to work. And it will be in competition with Bus Éireann, but competition is the life of trade. And, he needs a licence, and we need to encourage, whether it is him or whether it is Crimmins or whoever it is in West Cork that want to put forward a service like that. We should encourage it because he's offering it. He's going to offer it at a much cheaper rate. And why hasn't that been progressed or something along that line? Because Bus Éireann has been given amped time to reduce fares and to give them at a favourable rate, and that hasn't happened. And I'd appreciate maybe he might be able to elaborate further on that. The one issue that I have left on transport is those with disabilities of 18 years of age. Now, in the last 2.5 years, I've raised it today in the Dáil with the Taoiseach. I've raised it with Enda Kenny when he was Taoiseach, the country, that in Cork, in West Cork in particular, I can only talk in my own constituency. If you're 18 years of age, you will not get a transport service. You will get a public pass, bus pass, but that isn't sufficient for many with disabilities. So basically, you have people driving here, there and everywhere all day long, maybe 4 hours a day, 2 hours taking their children to training facilities or whatever and back. And when I mentioned to Minister McGrath, he tells me it's not an issue in Dublin. So they're being collected in Dublin, obviously, from the home, which is correct. And it is an issue in West Cork. And it's something that the Taoiseach and the Kinney didn't sideline as not an issue. Today, Taoiseach Varadkar didn't sideline and said, to deal with the Minister for Transport on the issue. the bottom line is people with disabilities at 18 years, once they reach the age of 18, are being left totally on their own, and their parents have been left on their own. It's an extremely stressful time for their parents, because most of them might be in the age bracket of 60, 70, and they're travelling every morning and evening, and it's taking an hour and a half to 2 hours up, an hour and a half to 2 hours down, back into West Cork again. It's very stressful, and it's something that needs to be looked at and could be done, because there's a lot of taxis and a lot of buses being paid by probably the Department of Transport, probably by the HSE, and they're all crossing paths with each other. Nobody's talking to anybody. And I think there needs to be, local link has a huge chance of playing in that field, basically, of organising and coordinating all that. Obviously, it will take a little bit of funding or whatever to pull together, but there might be money saved here in the long term, and everybody might be seen after. And I think there's somebody, you know, we looked in the last week in the public papers where Sarah DeLay from Dunmanway, who's a very successful business lady with spina bifida, cannot get public transport from Dunmanway because the bus area have told her, due to accessibility issues, they can't collect her at her bus stop in Dunmanway. And in this day and age, we've signed agreements that we're now compliant, basically, in Europe with disabilities, and we're not. We're very, very far away from it. But that's the issue in transport, and maybe you could enlighten me on that. I just touch on the roads, and I'll try as quickly as possible. I come from, you know, we don't have rail, and it's very much based on roads activities for people to go and come from the city back down into places like Bandon, Clonakilty, Skibbereen, Bantry, out to Castletownbere, onto the peninsula. We haven't had what I call, you'll say to me, what do you mean by decent money? But in areas like the N71 and the R586, we haven't had funding spent on them roads other than firefighting, basically repairs done to damage on them roads. In as long as I can remember, I think Skibbereen bypasses, and I was very young when that was put in there first, that was a fabulous bypass. That was the last piece of real money spent in West Cork. And I see in many parts of West Cork where you're going down into Bandon, you have, when you want to take the R586, you want to travel on the Ballineen to Inniskeen Road, you have two major factories there, Granger Sawmills, you have Ballineen Carbery factory there, you have lorries travelling at 25-30 kilometres and cars travelling for 15-20 kilometres behind them, and there's no passing bay. Simple passing bays. The same as you go from Bandon to Clonakilty, from Clonakilty to Skibbereen. I'm not here sitting to criticise anyone. All I'm trying to say is I have to face the electorate at some stage, whether it'll be a month's time or whether it'll be 2 years' time. And that's the first thing, broadband and the roads. You'll get that. Our mobile phone coverage might be the third. And I have no answer for them. I'm 2.5 years here looking for an answer to try and see, can we create simple solutions like passing bays on the N71 and passing bays on the R586. I'm not looking for flyovers. I'm not looking for anything else, only common sense passing bays. And I'd appreciate it. And investment, like, you know, I look, you know, you said there in what you were saying, there was 8.6 billion announced by Minister Ross and Minister Brendan Griffin about linking people with places. I'm down in the community in Lyre and Clonakilty. There's a bridge has been blown away due to bad weather 6-7 years ago. It has never been replaced. And the whole community is split up, and it's meaning people having to drive extra few miles here around this way and that way. And no one's ever thinking, would they replace the bridge? It was built probably in the 1900s, and there was money then, and we're now in 2018. There's no money to fix the bridge in Lyre and Clonakilty, and the people, the community, keep asking me, why isn't there money spent to fix that bridge? We can't pass it. It's blocked up for the last number of years, and small things mean a lot. And I look at, you know, I was above it, there's a transportation plan being drawn up for Castletownbere at the moment, and I would ask you to look into how we develop plans, how we work with local communities, because there's a lot of resentment to that plan, and some of it might be excellent, to be quite honest with you, but nobody sat down with the community and teased through the difficulties. And what I mean by that is, you'll say, they did go to the community, they did advertise what you were doing up on the wall, because I went there myself, but you need to sit down and talk. And now we're in gridlock, and it's left to politicians like me to try and resolve very serious issues for people who are basically, their businesses are hemorrhaging in rural Ireland, and they're afraid that they'll further lead to closures if they don't resist a lot of the plan. These issues could have been ironed out at the very beginning, and now we're faced with a situation where councillors have been asked oppose the plan, which is, you know, and I blame it basically, goes back down to people sitting down, talking with the local community and teasing out issues. And these things can be done in a lot of communities, but if people feel they're being ignored, they won't. And I'd appreciate maybe, you know, I know you might say, look, I'm looking at things in a negative sense. I'm not. I see a lot of improvements in towns like Drimoleague. There's money being spent, a lot of money being spent there at the present time in a fabulous resurfacing project. In Lepp, in West Cork, the same in the N71, but we're firefighting. all we're doing is repairing damage. We're not looking to the future. And West Cork has been left out there for a long time, and it needs to be prioritised, and we need to move some of the funds out of the second part of Ireland, that's Dublin, and look at the other Ireland, that's rural Ireland. I'd appreciate you might consider some of them.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Quite a number of issues have been raised by the three members, so I'd ask the delegation to respond to them, please.
Thank you, Chairman. A wide range of issues there, and I think very heartfelt issues that the deputies and senator have. You know, they're speaking from the experience that they have within their own areas and what they're seeing and experiencing. I might take them, I think, probably pretty much in order, but maybe with some clustering where there was some points that were made across a few interventions, and then in relation to the roads items, I'll call on my colleague to provide some comment on those. The fares issue, it has come up from Deputy Cuív and also Deputy Collins. Public transport fares, the 2009 Public Transport Regulation Act specifically provided that one of the functions that's to be carried out not by the Minister or Department but by the independent National Transport Authority is to regulate and set and determine fares. And it does this typically by way of an annual statement. They issued their fares determination about a week ago. It was sometime last week or the previous week. And when they do that, it's an exercise of powers that the Oireachtas has conferred on them, and powers that the Oireachtas has specifically said should no longer be exercised by Minister or Department, but by an independent authority, and done in this way. So matters about fares and the fairness of fares.
We're not talking about anybody setting a specific fare.
Yeah.
We're asking, so could the NTA decide tomorrow to have, as it does every year, outrageous fares in rural Ireland and outrageously small fares in urban Ireland because they just don't like rural people? And would the Minister not stand in it? And has he no policy role whatsoever?
Chair, we'll allow the witnesses to respond to you.
We just get an absolute clear yes or no on that.
Okay. Now we'll have the witnesses without interruption, and I can leave members back in again if you want further clarification. So go ahead.
Yes or no.
Chairman, the legislation says that fare setting is by the National Transport Authority.
That includes fare policy, the big policy. Yes or no?
The setting of fares and the reasons why the fares are set, it's set out in the legislation as to what the responsibilities of the NTA are. They're not matters in which it's proper for the Minister to make an intervention.
We change that law and we'll make it proper.
And, you know, the laws that are set by the Oireachtas are the laws that are...
interruption, Deputy, and then you can come back again later on. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it is a statutory function of the NTA. Now, they don't arbitrarily set fares.
They don't.
What they do, Chairman and Deputy, is that they set out, like what they published, I think it was about 2 weeks ago now, they published a document. It's somewhere in the region of 50 or 80 pages long, and their explanation of the changes that they've made to fares and what their approach is and what their strategy is over a period of time in relation to fares. As I understand it, what they're trying to do is to move over time to having fares that are relatively comparable on a distance basis or on like-for-like journeys. Now, obviously, the experience the Deputy is raising with us would be at variance with that, and we can bring that to the attention of the NTA. But overall, the approach has been decided by the Oireachtas as to how it's to be dealt with, and that's what happens. And they set their fares and publish them annually. They're available on the website. They're published and made very public, together with an explanation of the rationale and the longer-term strategy that the authority is trying to follow in relation to the setting of fares. Okay. On other matters then that have been raised, Deputy Cuív was asking about Éamon and whether there's policy about their providing efficient national services. Yes, the expectation of government is that Éamon, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of CIE, which is fully owned by the Minister for Transport on behalf of the Irish people, that company would provide transport services on the rail network that they have and run. They do provide services on a national basis. There's many types of service they provide. They provide commuter services, particularly around the cities. The notable one is the DART. As Deputy has referred to himself, there's an increasing commuter type service being built up in or around Galway. There's also commuter services that have been developed in recent years around Cork. In addition to that, they run the intercity services.
The commuter service from Galway, you might elucidate that.
Pardon?
What's the commuter service into Galway?
I was referring to the fact that the Deputy was referencing the services that are run on the line into Galway from Oranmore, from Athenry, and that there's now a frequency of services between all of the trains that are run that are helping to make it more useful.
I have it here in my app. If you check, there's no commuter services, because a commuter service means you've got regular trains coming in at commuter times. There is no such thing. There are 2 trains come in the morning and 2 trains go out in the evening. One goes to Dublin, one goes to Limerick. By chance, people can get on them, but they're not a commuter service.
Point on that one, Deputy.
Yeah, but this idea that they're developing commuter services, they just happen to run 2 intercity trains in, the people perforce.
Thank you, Deputy. You've made your point on that. I'll ask you to continue, please.
I suppose our point would be that passengers are choosing to use the trains in certain ways. They live in certain areas, they work in other areas or commute for education purposes, and they're availing of the services that are available. There's intercity services that are run right across the network, and then there's parts of the network that don't run between cities, but they are towns, large towns, and the services that are run provide facilities for all passengers who want to travel between those points along the lines.
Point, could I ask, and both Deputy Cuív and Senator Hopkins raised in relation to commuter services the scheduling and the timing of those and how they match the modern needs of society.
That's an interesting set of points, and it's come up from a few members of the committee, so it's one that we will refer back to our colleagues in Éamon and the NTA. Timetabling issues are, I suppose, core operational issues for a transport company. So timetabling is something that's done primarily by the public service transport providers, in this case by the rail company, and overall, especially in the bus area, timetabling would be overseen by the NTA. So they have roles there. There isn't a role for ministers or department in relation to those operational matters. But the fact that deputies and senators are raising this as a point is one of those things that we are interested in hearing today, because it's going to feed back into the thinking that we have about the development of services, about public transport policy and the approaches that can best be developed for the future, and how public transport can best be articulated for the Irish public.
Okay.
There was the rural hackneys. Yes, the deputy is correct. The rural hackney licence is an innovation that was introduced by the transport regulator a number of years ago. I think it was around 2012, in around that time, and it was a response to the fact that in rural areas there was an identified issue about the availability of taxi services, and it was thought that this might provide an additional feature that could be availed of by some people. It hasn't proven popular. Deputy Cuív was asking as to whether there's a proposal to review it. Yes, there is some review work underway with the Taxi Advisory Committee and the National Transport Authority, which is the statutory regulator for taxis. And in the course of that, I think one of the issues that they're going to be looking at is the fact that this rural hackney licence, although introduced as an innovation, hasn't been taken up much. And to look at that and to see what are the reasons for it, and are there other ways of approaching the matter. Suggestions were made in the course of comments today. Are there other ways of approaching the matter that would be useful to pursue? So we'll reference that back to them. Now, on other points that were raised, timetabling, we've done that. Local link, yes, the local link service, I think, I won't go over it again now, but I referenced it in the opening statement. There has been strong development of that service, and there does seem to be very strong and positive feedback about it throughout the country. Obviously, that's a good thing, but there's calls for more, and we have been able to provide additional funding for that through the combination of the specific funding for rural transport programme and also through the public service obligation programme. And communities throughout the country are seeing the benefit of that. It's small interventions that really can have a big effect and have that impact on linking people and places, which is the name that the Minister of State chose when they were launching their transport part of the NDP, because that's really the critical theme that they're trying to speak to in developing these proposals. Senator Hopkins asked about the policy statement that we're working on bringing forward, and will that translate directly into benefits for rural Ireland or rural people, and how will we know when it's done? Will we see the benefit? I suppose what we're talking about in relation to a policy statement is really a gathering together and an articulation of what is the state's policy, the government's policy in relation to a particular area of work. In this case, when you look at public transport and when you look at other areas of our department, public transport is an area that we haven't yet pulled together one single cohesive statement synthesising what the policy is. Now, we've any number of policy documents, they're here, there and everywhere, but we don't have a synthesis. And within the department, we have worked on that approach over the last number of years. It's been done for aviation policy. There's a single document called the National Aviation Strategy. We have a National Tourism Strategy. Recently, just this summer, there was a National Sport Policy document that was pulled together by the department, synthesising its approach to things and launched by the Minister and Minister of State. So the aim in relation to public transport is to do something similar. Of itself, a policy statement doesn't necessarily make anybody's life any better, but what it does is it provides in a single place a very coherent and easily accessible definition of what it is we're trying to do, and it enables a discussion as to what it is we should be doing as we come to formulate in that, and then it allows for government to agree, well, these are the key principles that we want to do. Now, they're not likely to be principles that are alien to what's been done heretofore, but it is a synthesis and an articulation and is setting down in one place at one time of really what it is that's expected to be at the core of this. And it's a guidance for governments and for policymakers and for those plethora of agencies and state agencies that we have working in the sector, and it guides them for the future. It's kind of a reference point as to that they can use as a compass to check that they're navigating in the right direction. The question of bus services to link with rail, which Deputy Collins was asking about, yeah, that again in around timetabling. So it isn't a matter that the department directly deals with, but it is interesting to hear that perspective and the real need that there is to provide the connectivity and the interconnection. By ensuring that the various strands and facets of public transport that we provide link up with one another, the NTA has a specific role in relation to integration of transport, and that's something that I think was seen by the legislators and the policy developers around 08-09 when the NTA's legislation was being developed. And it's something that really is critical because it helps us to get beyond the sum of the parts. So if you have a bus service doing this amount of service and a rail service doing the other, well, they're good. If you can have some level of integration that makes sense and that still has a healthy competitive tension among it, then you can get better outcomes. So we will ask the reference that matter to the NTA to take a look at for the deputy. Licence applications, the deputy asked about also in relation to the potential for bus licensing of a commercial operator who's interested in providing a bus service. This is something the NTA does. It's going back a number of years. It would previously have been done by the department, but they run it now. There's a lot of information available on their website if any interested parties are interested in developing a proposal for a bus route and have their ideas about it, and it provides guidance there on how to make applications. It also gives an outline of the time frame that somebody who is making an application, the time frame within which he or she can expect to have their licence application turned around and when they can expect to have a response to things. In relation to the question then of disability and transport services, I only touched on it very briefly in the opening statement because of the length of other matters, but there is an increasing drive to improve the accessibility of public transport, and there have been strong improvements over a number of years, together with the department I suppose becoming more involved with stakeholders in the sector and engaging with them regularly to get a better understanding of what needs there are and how they can best be dealt with through the public transport systems that we have. There are places, and we haven't got there yet. Okay, so there are elements of the system that aren't yet fully working or aren't working as cogently as we would expect. That said, within the cities, there's 100% accessibility of the urban transport fleet. There's very substantial accessibility of the bus stops. So getting onto the urban transport fleet, there are still some bus stops that I think a small number that have still to be upgraded. But by and large, there's a good story within the cities. Around the country, the situation is not as good, but it is over time improving. Within the Bus Éireann network, they are, as they replace their coaches, replacing them with improved accessible coaches, and I think they've got to a level now where in around 80%, 86% of their coach fleet is accessible. That said, we're back to the same issue: is the bus stop compatible with an accessible coach? And it tends to be that if you have journeys that are going, say, between bus stations, that is accessible, but if you're getting off at other points in between places, which obviously many people are, that the accessibility there is not as good at all. For that reason, the NTA is rolling out a programme of improving the accessibility bus stops throughout the country. What they're trying to do is to do it on a route basis. The routes that they've picked to start with are the ones, excuse me, are the, I think, Dublin-Donegal routes where there isn't an alternative public transport service. There isn't rail service, so they're trying to start it there. And they are scheduling to develop it around the country. I don't know the precise pattern in which they're doing it, so I'm not aware of what the plans are specifically.
Briefly, this committee has a specific remit in terms of rural provision, rural services. I think the Deputy, you're referring to a case where there was a disabled lady in West Cork that's finding it very difficult to get transport support. And you know, is there anything that you can tell the committee, that is there any evaluation that either the department or the NTA are looking at in terms of disability services, you know, to address what the concerns the Deputy is raising?
Those as well that have no service at all.
No service at all, or support, is it?
No service or no support in West Cork.
Okay, maybe I'll address that. It is the issue, as you said, Deputy Collins, and you know, people are over 18 with disabilities, and all of a sudden they don't have the transport, particularly in a place like West Cork. So, one of the things the NTA are doing, and it's part of their own strategy statement and their plan for the next 4 years, is the integration of the non-emergency HSE transport services with the local link services, and that's something that they're looking for. To give kind of a better opportunity for better services in that regard. They are in fact doing a pilot at the moment with HSE, and I think they're looking at Cork-Kerry region as the planned area to look at. And it's specifically HSE relating to people with disabilities. So that might assist in some way, but we'll certainly bring it back to the NTA. We've also met with the HSE in that regard, but we're leaving it to both HSE and NTA to run this pilot, and hopefully it might achieve some results.
Deputy?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next group of questions, if that's all right. But before I do, and Ms O'Hanlon, I note your title, Assistant Secretary for Public Transport, Sustainability and Climate Change. And I think it's something we should mention here in this committee, because obviously we all know the sectors energy, agriculture and transport contribute a lot to our carbon emissions. And just a brief question I have in relation to sustainability policy. You know, the potential for electric vehicles in the public transport fleet. You know, what's the views of the department in relation to, I suppose, motivating our public transport agencies to improve their carbon emission footprint? And if you could give a view on that. And also, and I know Senator Sullivan will agree with me on some of this, in relation to cycling infrastructure in our towns and villages, where there's either new roads or upgrades of roads, that there is adequate provision in our estimates for cycling infrastructure to try and improve access for cycling and sustainability in that regard. So just if you'd note some of those. And now I'd like to call on Senator O'Sullivan, followed by Deputy Fitzmaurice, followed by Deputy Danny Healy-Rae. So, Senator O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Chair, I was just want to refer to the comment by Deputy Cuív in terms of fares. And I was kind of wondering, should we be looking at affordability, you know, and in terms of equality, so that there is a fair regime throughout the country, and that people who are in rural areas, that they're not disadvantaged. And it might be something we could look at in the committee to ensure, just if the NTA have put out their fair regime, that we do look at it and we make sure that there isn't
That's a welcome proposal. The department can answer, but I think it would be in our interest to have the NTA in specifically and talk about fares, affordability and the regional context.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And then, Ms Hanlon, I'm a Green Party member, so we were quite disappointed with the recent budget in terms of the focus on public transport and the allocation of funds to the areas of cycling and walking. way. So I would just want to maybe press you a little bit more in terms of that, your policy in terms of sustainability. And with regard to our carbon emissions, like what is the policy of the department in terms of transiting away from oil-burning modes of transport, and then in addition, what is the policy with regard to supporting EVs, electrical vehicles, and what's the department's policy in terms of supporting bicycles with regard to schemes we see here in Dublin and in the cities like Cork, so where you have that very efficient system at the train stations that's where we, smart connectivity where people can benefit from using public transport. I lived in the Netherlands for 9 years, and it is very frustrating to be here in Ireland. I'm from Tramore. Because the opportunities to use public transport because of timing and that, like the rail services, the last train in the evening is around 6 o'clock, which is pity. Now, the morning schedule is excellent, but the evening isn't. And so what are you doing to try to create a better system where people can use public transport, have the connectivity, and avoid the congestion? Because congestion is an enormous problem in this country at the moment in terms of trying to access. Dublin is a disaster. Galway is a disaster. I mean, it's absolutely, the congestion is desperate. And when people are sitting in congested traffic, not only is there frustration, but you're burning all those fossil fuels which are leading to the climate acceleration. And so, what are you doing, and particularly because your own remit is sustainability and climate, what are you doing in terms of mitigation policies around extreme weather events? So, for instance, in Waterford, when there is heavy rains, the train station floods. So what monies have been set aside, and what are you adapting or are you mitigating in this regard? Then I have some questions here. Yeah, the freight train between Ballina and Waterford was it's ended service May 2018. So I mean, again, to me that seems regressive, that we're pushing away from using systems of transport. So in that case, you could have taken the train from Rosslare through to Waterford and up to Ballina. So what's going to happen with that railway line now? Could it be used for public transport? Because again, tourism is part of your remit. Could we be bringing tourists in to Rosslare and right up to the Wild Atlantic Way via Waterford by utilising a line that probably is still, still possible to do that? And then what is the policy with regard to closed and abandoned railway lines with regard to greenway development? And just in terms of procurement, again, in terms of EV buses in the Netherlands, if you go to Nijmegen or anywhere, I mean, that country has already made the shift. So they've gone into transport buses and that are electric. So, what can we do to speed up the process? I want to ask you as well about what's the future strategy with regard to the line from Waterford to Limerick Junction, the railway line. And then, is there any discussion in the department around connecting Waterford with Limerick with Galway? So, in terms of a rail network. And then to go back to the Green Party, when we had our budget submission, one of the suggestions was that given climate change and given cost and affordability and the difficulties that students have with renting, what would you think about all public transport being free to students? Do you think that is realistic given the pressures that we have with regard to affordability, but also in terms of encouraging the youth to use public transport? And last thing, there's this system called the blah blah car, and it's funny I'm bringing it up.
Please, Senator, what?
Yeah, it's funny I'm bringing it up because I'm from Waterford, so I was looking at it. It's called the blah blah car, and the blah blah car is the system they use in Europe. It's carpooling. It's an international carpooling mechanism. Blabla.com it's called. And I'm just wondering, because my children use it all the time when they're abroad. So it's like, it's such an efficient system. So are you aware of that, and is there any opportunity for us to encourage a company like BlaBlaCar into Ireland, again, to be more efficient in terms of car usage, in terms of filling it up with people, but also it's a brilliant mechanism in terms of affordability. If people are on very tight budget, you just literally put, you go online and you link up with someone who's travelling up and down, maybe with, just one or two in the car. So it's a really good mechanism. So is there any opportunity for us to bring in a company like that?
Thank you very much, Senator. And again, I'd ask our witness to hold those questions, and I'll call now on Deputy Fitzmaurice, please.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Thanks for your presentation. I'll give it fairly straight to you, a few straight questions. Under the programme for government, and you spoke about that in the Department of Transport, there is a commitment that Ireland would make an application to Europe for TNT funding for the west of Ireland or the Western Arc. Nothing has been done on that. I want just a straight question and a straight answer. Why hasn't there something been done on that? FOIs have been sent to you for a file and what's in it, and it seems to be very reluctant in getting information out of it. Second question. I note from what you said the funding priority for the interurban rail network under the National Development Plan is to protect investment already made in our national railway system by funding maintenance and safety projects needed to maintain safety and service levels in railway operations. If we are to move to this wonderland world that I hear everybody on about, of moving towards electric in our from Dublin to Cork and Dublin to Belfast and Dublin to Galway and Dublin to Westport, in seeking to inroad there, then it will cost $3 billion. Is that money there? First of all. Second of all, as been asked earlier on, and I don't want you to box out of this because I'm about 6 months trying to get to the root of it. There is a rail corridor going from Limerick to Galway. There is talk about a review from Healy-Rae, Cuív, Claremorris. The NTA were in. They said, oh, no. We cover across the east side of the country. There was two different groups in here that I was trying to nail down once and for all to get a straight answer. There's an alleged rail review going on at the moment. Going by the statement that you have said there, would you agree that where the priority is lying in funding, that you have no intention, from what I am reading here, to open that? Because the statement is very clear. Second of all, you don't appear to have any funding for putting, and in talking to Barry Kinney, and I've spoken in detail about that, the likes of Longford and Athlone, if you were to put the high-speed trains that we talk about in Europe, and we need to make sure we're not talking about apples and oranges. The Netherlands is the size of Munster, and it is 3.5 times the people, so it's more economical to put trains around it. So we need to make sure we don't get carried away in some of those places. Ireland is more remote, and I understand that fully. But we need to nail down, will the Western Rail Corridor be either done or not done? And I'm waiting for about 2 years to get an answer on this. In the line of buses, would you agree that the Euro 6 bus is the same as gas at the moment in emissions? And that the biodiesel buses, have you done research on it? My understanding that there's a company in England that put 20% of their buses on electric, and after 3 years they're getting rid of the lot of them because the batteries are giving ferocious trouble. Are we going to jump into the sea and not be able to swim when we go down that road of spending a lot of money? Has it been researched fully, and is it workable? In the line of your transport policy for Galway, I don't think the West of Ireland matters to you, to be honest about it, for the simple reason there is nowhere to lose. There is the only thing that's in Galway, and it's like Nancy Griffith's song From a Distance, is that next week we're going to on board Planola for the outer bypass, and we'll probably go around the world and back again with people objecting, and in probably 7 or 8 years' times after a heap of court cases, we might get it sometime, but Galway is chronic. I come to Dublin. I live 40 miles from Galway. You might know it because you probably don't live down there. I live 40 miles from Galway, and I'm 112 or 18 miles from Dublin. And I can be here in the Dáil quicker than I can go to the County Council building in Galway. Isn't that a fierce damnation on a Department of Transport? That a city like Galway, that has brought the biggest companies to it, that has rail infrastructure gone into it, and that we haven't a network that can handle what's going into it. We are losing jobs in Galway, in case you didn't know, in Galway City, unfortunately, even in things growing. And that's not criticising a government, by the way. It's not, it's because of infrastructure. We have a Western, and Senator Hopkins would be at it as well, we meet the business people in the west of Ireland every year. We have companies in Westport that will tell us that 20% of their goods are damaged when it gets to Dublin, because the road from Westport to Mullingar, it's a disaster for them, for transport. You talked about the amount of goods going on the roads, and at the same time, there are parts of this country at the moment on the expressway bus service that they have, and this is a time now that we're talking about getting people into buses, not into cars, that we have cut the services in a lot of the small towns. Bear in mind, we're talking about trying to get people on buses. And at the same time, we have rail problems in haulage of the rail, because the lines, obviously, and has to prioritise passengers. The rural, you talked about the Hackney, and you're saying you're sort of looking into it. Well, I'll tell you why. I've dealt with one of the licences. You go and you apply. Before you apply, you have to go up to the council and spend about 3 months for them to write a letter that there's a need in the area. Then you'll get a lovely letter out that you need a study in your area. This is voluntary, people, and that your community needs it. And you have some community group then that has to try and formulate a study to prove that you need someone and you have no one in an area. And that's the reason why, because people are sick to the teeth of the paperwork, so I do it. That's, like, I can answer that for you because I've handled that. And we done a study, going back the years, and then they tell you, that's out of date now, how are you going now? Even though that there's absolutely no mode of public transport or private transport in an area, which you still have to go and get a community group without funding, they don't get funding for that, to do a complete analysis of the area to why you need someone to bring a few people home from a pub. And that's telling you. In the line of, this is a question. I was talking to a guy last night that is a new bus bought. Under the rural transport scheme, it is now compulsory that you have to have a wheelchair accessible. That's good, and I agree with that. But if you want to bring tourists from America, from Kerry to Donegal, and you buy a new bus, on the length of the bus, you don't have to have it wheelchair accessible, by the way, that's not written into this. It's on the length of the bus that you get the VAT back or not get it back. But if you're in a rural part of the country under the rural transport scheme and you put it in at 6,000, it's costing 6,000 because this guy bought a new bus and it's 6,000 per person for each side. You can put it in 2 sides and it's costing 6,000 to make it wheelchair accessible. That's 12,000 to be able to accommodate for 2 people, and you won't get the VAT back. Now, if we're trying to incentivise people to buy the proper bus in rural parts, to give local transport for it, why are we driving them away when at the same time, depends on the length of your bus, if there's a fair big bumper in it, you'll get the VAT back, but you won't get anything back if you buy, you know it yourself, in rural areas in the local link transport, it's a smaller bus, around 18-seater or 20-seater, because you're not going to bring a 53-seater down a bog road. And there's no, even though they have to go through all the expense, and it's probably costing ye more because there's no incentive there. It's costing the NTA more because there's no incentive there. On the road network, you talked about 100,000 kilometres, I think, in the country. Well, Galway has a 20th of that. Why is County Galway, per kilometre of road, less funded than, and we've had some of your department officials in, less funded than any other, than 99% of them in the rest of the country? And if you want to talk about property tax, I'll go down that they were getting 12.5 from the central government, 12.5 million. They collected 14.5 in property tax, so they give back $1.5 million extra on that. And in the vision of, you talk about Cork Mallow, is there any vision to put what I would call a proper road from Mullingar? I know you're going to talk about Colooney, I know you're going to talk about Termon Barry, and them are bits, but is there any vision that we will put a proper road from Mullingar? Now, when I call a proper road, is a dual carriageway minimum to Westport, and from the Tuam motorway, which is an exceptionally good job, and it's connecting us now all the way down to when Cork Mallow is done, to be a fine facility. But from there up to Letterkenny, because if you look at the areas, including Sligo, we don't have a proper bus service in Galway or in all of them towns or cities. They're going to be made cities out, in fairness to the 2040 thing. We don't have any plans whatsoever for a Lewis or a tram system in them. I know that you talk about park and ride, and I think it's a great idea, but seeing it and believing it when it happens. But where is the vision going forward? And I think the first start to that vision is in the first question I asked you. The TNT funding, and I know the ifs and the percentages and all of that. I'm not asking that. It's written in the programme for government, 2.5 years into it. Why hasn't that been put in for the Western Arc or the west of Ireland, going up to the north of Ireland? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. And there's a lot of questions there, and again, it has the delegation to hold those, quite wide-ranging, but interesting insight to rural concerns, I think, from various members. I would ask you to take on board. Deputy Danny Healy-Rae, then, in this round, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I suppose when I talk about transport and school transport, I have to declare, in case someone has said a conflict of interest, that I have a small bus transport service operating. My father operated before me since 1956, so I just wanted to declare that. I suppose the question in relation to that is, there is a rule operated by Éamon where private contractors operating school transport can't have a bus older than 20 years, and there is 20 years that off the road. But how is it that Bus Éamon themselves were using buses more than 20 years up until very lately? Maybe they're off the road now, but I've been advised that they were on the road up until very lately, and they were in excess of the 20 years. When we talk about transport, there was a big hullabaloo by Minister Ross, and indeed some of his ministers on the Fine Gael side, the propaganda about this rural link operated evening service to bring people out in the evenings and to bring them back home again. In Kerry there was eight services to operate, were given the signal to operate for. 7 of them were once a week, and one of them then of course was once a month to bring cart players from a place called Castle Gregory to Crohan. But a promise was given that that service would be extended, that was only a pilot service, and that would be extended. But yet I don't see any mention of it in any budget or any talk that that service is to be increased or enhanced. And I'm only wondering, what is your answer to that? When we're talking about bus and lorry transport and all that, we have all of South Kerry that's left void of a test centre, and it means that that people who want to test their lorry, test their bus, have to leave Belinshire, Cahersiveen, and travel northwards to North Kerry, and indeed into Cork because it's nearer in places. But many of these operators are asking for an NCT or an MOT rather to be provided in the southern half of the county. And who DOES, who decides? Is it your department that decides where these are placed? So I'd like an answer to that, please. In relation to roads, we got our 3-year road funding has been put together recently, but you see, the regional roads are put in with the local roads, and it has been highlighted in our local authority for many, many years that the regional roads should they should be given funding of their own, because they take the bigger part of the local road funding in any 3-year, and that's many councillors in our local authority are asking for a separate funding for the regional roads, because they're longer and they're wider, and they take up the bulk, a great sizable chunk of the funding for the local roads, the local link roads, and even long cul-de-sac byroads. Then, in relation to we have 2 types of funding for road pavement and road strengthening. The road strengthening is great when we get funding for it, but many people then, when they see us doing the road pavement, which is to seal a road, God, they say, why are we spending money on a good road, and my road is way worse? And like that then, the department, I'm sure it's your department, has insisted that funding is put aside now in each engineering area of €50,000 should bad weather come and that a road would be damaged. But what I would say to you, it's very hard to explain that it's put in the bottom of the list in each area, because roads that are not on the programme, people come up to us from a road that's very bad at the present time, and they're asking when they ask, what is that 50,000 for? And we have to tell them that maybe if we get bad weather or flooding or something, that money is there, kept but they're saying, sure, we don't have to wait for our road to get bad at all, because our road is bad at present. Why can't we spend the money? And always in the past, if there was bad weather and if there was extreme circumstances, there was funding provided, you know, from the Exchequer to help in cases like that. But this is it's diminishing the amount of money that we get, and it's hard to explain it to people who are travelling a bad road as it is, to try to tell them we're waiting for some other road to get bad to spend that money on it. So then I want to ask you, how are projects selected? We'll say national primary projects, because IBEC tell us that we have the least projects, first of all, in this country than any other country in Europe at the present time. And they keep pointing out that interest rates were never lower and that money is easily got for these projects. But I'm asking, how are the projects selected? Because the Killarney bypass was promised in 2003 and in 2004. There was a big presentation in the Great Southern Hotel at the time, and this project was going ahead. The name of the hotel changed into the Malton Hotel for a while, and now it is the Great Southern Hotel again, but we still don't have the Killarney bypass. And there's 18,500 vehicles going through the ring road that we have at the present time. The road is chock-a-block, and it has been determined that the road isn't safe anymore for the volume of traffic that's going through it. So I'm asking that this project be progressed and prioritised, and we're hoping now and taking for granted that the Macroom bypass is going ahead. And but I'm asking that this very important project, because it serves the incentive coming in from the Malls Gap side, if this bypass was put in place from Castlelock to Lisbegeen, it would help the people to be taking all the traffic around Kinmare Place that want to go on to Tralee or up the country, whatever. And likewise, the traffic coming in on the M22, the town is absolutely choking. On the one hand, it's a good sign that the town is, and that there's traffic and people coming, but at the same time, it's felt that the town will lose out eventually, because people are not happy to be sitting in their cars on a warm evening for maybe from 3 o'clock, that kind of time, to 7 o'clock in the evening, maybe for an hour and a half or 2 hours at the time. No one is happy with that. I suppose just to ask the question, because it's being asked of me by contractors, Bus Éamon, who operates school transport, is the school transport funding, how is that given to Bus Éamon? Is it subsidising other operations by that Bus Éamon are carrying out, other services that they're carrying out? So I just finishing up, Chairman. There's just one other thing that I'm very upset about, and indeed many people are right around the country. All this talk about climate change and about carbon tax, and the big cry since the budget was, oh, there was no...
If you have a specific point with regards to public transport on climate change, we'll take it, but we're not opening it to a wider debate at this time.
Right.
Go ahead.
You see, Deputy Fitzmaurice raised it there. But,
yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, but I have to agree with him. There's a lot of talk about climate change and electric vehicles, and that the bus fleet should be, that we should have so much of a percentage of the bus fleet that it should be battery operated. It is a fact now, and it's coming home to roost, that these batteries, even in cars, will give you a lot of trouble. Is this going to be another experiment that's going to cost the Exchequer and cost the people that are paying for their taxes and paying for fares? Is this going to be another ridiculous attempt? Because we had people from the road hauliers and other people in here that explained that the Euro 6 diesel engine that we have now does not affect the climate, and that there's no emissions from the new Euro 6 diesel engine. So why when we have something right, do we have to experiment and change it and go down some other road that we're not sure are not certain of? And then certainly the signs are that these battery-operated vehicles are not going to last. I spoke there earlier about buses, by bus and being over 20 years of age. I can guarantee if we expect that buses operated by a battery are going to last 20 years or more, if another guest coming to you, because that's not going to happen. And you see, the thing has to be, and there's so much talk about this climate change, Chairman. If we were to reduce our emissions altogether, it would only be, 0.13% in the worldwide context. 0.13%.
We'll ask the officials to respond with regard to the future fuelling of public transport, and if there is evaluations, and if what the thinking is within the department. So I'll ask the officials to respond to that particular question. So thank you for your views on that. I'm conscious of time, and I want to give every member an opportunity to put questions, and I want to leave in Senator Dolan next. But before I do, Senator, you'll forgive me. Most of what I had to say has been covered, so I'm going to be very brief. But something that we have spoken about in this committee a lot is, for the regions and for rural areas, is connectivity. Whether it's broadband or road or rail, it's connectivity. And it's essential, in my view, that whatever policies we devise, that we are improving regional connectivity first, because if our regional connectivity is good, well then local access will be better also as an extension of that. And one question I have, and I note your comments with regard to Ireland 2040 and the National Development Plan, the regional cities identified in that for growth, for large urban growth, one of those is the area I come from myself in Waterford. And the access to Waterford from other cities in the country, the only good one is to Dublin, if I'm honest about it. The N25 to Cork is dilapidated. There's roadworks forever going on in Castlemartyr. As long as I remember going to Munster finals back in the early 1980s, and there was roadworks in Castlemartyr. I'm now almost 50 and there's still roadworks going on in Castlemartyr. So, what's actually going on with a primary national road, the N25, where it just seems to be in a very poor state. And further to that, the N24 to Limerick, connecting two regional cities that it's estimated will grow in population, almost double in population by 2040. And the N24, I have to say, again, is one of the worst national routes in the country in terms of number one, the surface, number two, the amount of bends, number three, the amount of accidents, and number four, the amount of villages that it goes through. It's a terrible road, connecting two of our cities that we have such high ambitions for. And I would like to hear the department's views on how we're going to connect those cities by proper national primary routes, and then by extension improving the access for the regions into those networks. I'd just like to put that to you, because I think the current situation here we are in 2018 with the N24 and the N25 in a deplorable state. I'd like to hear your views on how we're going to improve that in accordance with the ambition you've outlined under Ireland 2040 and the National Development Plan. I think it's essential we do. So sorry, Senator Dolan.
I just to follow up very quickly, particularly because the issue of the University Hospital Waterford that relies on that route to get from Waterford down to Cork, that bottleneck in Castlemartyr is dreadful, so there's huge health and safety issue there that needs to be addressed.
Thank you very much. Senator Dolan, apologies, I want to let you in there.
And you still haven't brought home in All Ireland after all that travelling. And first of all, can I thank the witnesses for coming in and seeking to engage with us and hear what we have to say. I'd also like to just say a word of appreciation. A number of things have happened in terms of people with disabilities. I think there's a lot more to happen. The increase in the parking fine for people who are wrongly using the disabled parking bays has been a great fill-up morale boost for people. I think there's a lot more can be done there as well, but credit where credit is due, and also the appointments of maybe about half a dozen people with disabilities to a slew of public transport boards is a move in the right direction, and that's also to be very welcomed. I want to start with the, believe it or not, Article 9 of the United Nations Convention on the Status of People with Disabilities. I just want to quote from the very start of it. States parties, and that now means Ireland since April of this year, shall take appropriate measures to ensure to persons with disabilities access on an equal basis with others to the physical environment, transportation to information communications, etc., both in urban and in rural areas. And we're talking particularly about rural Ireland East today. These measures, which shall include the identification and elimination of obstacles and barriers to accessibility, shall apply inter alia to a slew of particular things. We won't go into that. 19th of April, we lodged the papers in New York with the UN. 19th of April, 2 years from now, in 2020, Ireland is due to make its first report on the progress it has made. So my question is, does your department have an implementation plan in relation to making Article 9 accessibility happen in relation to your own department? And the pointed end of that is, what is your intention? What do you hope to be reporting to the UN Disability Committee in April 2020? We mentioned rural, I think it's about 37% of the population live in rural Ireland, something like that. That's 228,000. It's 250,000 people with disabilities. 250,000 people with disabilities and their families. So I'd like to put that on the record just to make it clear. You mentioned in your presentation the National Transport Authority. And can I say very clearly and sadly again, I have no confidence, based on what I have seen from that authority, in relation to them understanding, first of all, and having an empathy with the issue that we've just discussed there, providing inclusive transport solutions for people with disabilities. My evidence comes from it from March 2017, when they advised the Minister and the rest of us. During that strike, the bus Éireann strike, 3 bus Éireann sets of buses were being taken off 3 routes, leaving 3 private operators who had licences to operate those routes. And they said to us at the time, there was no diminution in service. It's interesting they could say that when all the buses left on the routes were not wheelchair accessible, and what's even worse, and it goes back to points being raised by colleagues on my left here, were not required to be accessible. We are giving licences to bus companies, and I'm not getting into public versus private, I'm just getting into Joe Bloggs in a wheelchair or with a mobility impairment doesn't need to know the logo on the bus, or shouldn't need to know the logo on the bus to be able to get the bus from Clonmel to Dublin out to the airport. That was one of the routes. The other instance is July passed. On the 18th of July, the NTA were in here. I asked them, and it was about Bus Connects. And Bus Connects, or the eye of that storm at the moment, is in Dublin. But as you have said, it's due to go nationwide in the fullness of time. There was no engagement with people with disabilities or their representative organisations until 2 days before that hearing. And that engagement happened because a disabled person on the National Disability Inclusion Strategy Committee pushed for it. And that was, the horse was well gone. The buses, was it 60 or 80 buses, I forget the exact number, had been ordered from Wrights in Ballymena, had been delivered, paid for, liveried, everything done. And the day before that meeting, people with disabilities, with visual impairments, physical impairments and hearing impairments, for their first chance, got to look at those buses and pointed out a number of things. We were told at the committee that some of the things could be sorted, but you are actually now retrofitting solutions to something that should have been done. There's been a disability access committee in the department going back to the 80s. This is not new stuff. 20 years ago, there was 100 buses came into the fleet thanks to an exchequer grant of it was $1.5 million at the time, unprecedented, and not one of them was accessible. And 20 years later, the same stuff goes on. The consultant that was appointed to Bus Connects was not asked by the department or the NTA or whoever, have you any experience of providing accessible public transport systems? So they're my reasons for saying that, and I don't see any change in that. If such an important body can be, and I'll use the term dismissive, they could not even tell us that day or give us an estimate of the number of disabled people with mobility impairments, Cuív, that are now have a one bus journey from start to finish. How many of them, or an estimate of the number of those who would have to take a second, get off one and get back on again? Like, you could nearly ask the drivers on the routes and they'd nearly tell you people's names where they got on and off. I think it is quite dismissive of the whole project that Ireland has taken on. So let me lead. I'd be interested in any comment that you'd have to make in relation to that. The regional expressway regional services. Wheelchair accessibility is available on a number of bus air and coaches, and I'll qualify that by saying when they operate the way they should operate, when they operate to the 24-hour rule or whatever. Operating on expressway and regional service, however, the number of routes is limited due to constraints regarding accessible bus stops. This has already been touched on. The introduction of additional fully accessible routes is dependent on the ultimate production of suitably accessible bus stops. Each wheelchair accessible coach has one wheelchair space which must be booked, as I said, 24 hours in advance using the reservation system. There are still routinely issues with people being able. Now, first of all, it sticks in my craw that a member of the public has to give 24 hours notice, still in this country, to use a public bus or a train. But that is the case. But when they do that, they still have their fingers crossed on both hands that the bus will be accessible when they get there, or if they get to where they're going, they have a bigger plight to wonder about whether they'll get home. That is reality for people with mobility impairments in Ireland today. There's a lot of different issues there, but the coaches are now accessible. 86%, I think you said. Okay, you still have the bus stop issues along the route. I'll come back to that in a minute. We've expressway routes, I think 6 of them are wheelchair accessible. Dublin Belfast, Dublin Waterford, Dublin Limerick, Dublin Galway, Dublin Letterkenny, Waterford to Cork. The PSO routes, 7 of them, all but one are Dublin and the Dublin hinterland. The one that isn't is Galway to Ballina. Navan Dublin, Navan DCU, Trim Dublin, Drogheda Blanchardstown, Dublin to Kells. The point I'm making is there is a strong, strong pull into Dublin City and around Dublin City. And there's an equity issue, and other members of the committee have well raised that in other ways this evening. Whether it's people with disabilities or others, there's a huge drag in and around Dublin. I can understand that, but we have to create, those of us involved in public policy, a counter-drag the other way so that people can move around. And Cuív, look, you raised the N24. We need saw doctors to do something about the N25 and the N24. But I know well the N24. I come from Tipperary town. And you have an issue. There was a big protest in Tipperary at the weekend more than the number of people who live in the town came out and protested about jobs and issues. And the state of roads and the lack of a bypass were some of those issues. So I suppose it's that public transport isn't just about transport, it's about people's lives socially and economically. And you have a rail junction, Limerick Junction, on the outskirts of that town, which links horizontally and vertically Dublin, Cork, Limerick, beyond Limerick, down to Waterford. So that's a town that's dying on its knees, and I think the Department of Transport and or agencies under its remit, could do some very practical things. The bypass and looking at the state of the roads in and around the town, and to see can we start using strategically the fact that you have north, south, east, west through Limerick Junction. Let me come on finally a number of very specific questions, Cathaoirleach, and this tips back to some of the things I've raised already. What level of engagement has the department had and does it have with local authorities around the country with regard to the creation of wheelchair accessible bus stops? That's part of the conundrum. You can have all your fleet accessible, but the bus stops in rural and regional Ireland must be accessible as well, right? And I know there's a responsibility with local authorities there as well. What percentage of the local link fleet is wheelchair accessible? Has there been any progress in relation to inserting a protocol or a requirement that no new public service licences will be issued to operators unless they have a 100% accessible fleet? I think it's unfair to the public purse and to public service that we're licensing private operators and the public transport operator has at least one of their hands tied behind their backs when the private operator can just rock up with an inaccessible bus. I just think, even apart from people with disabilities, I just don't see the sense in that. I mean, my obviously reason is people with disabilities. And finally, can the officials refer to the committee with the figures for disability awareness training for Irish Rail, Bus Air and Local Link staff have undertaken, and how often refresher training is delivered?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your advocacy on behalf of disability. I think it is important that we bring it into the wider context on
we're all going there someday.
Definitely, definitely. So look, I'd say to the officials that we've a lot of wide-ranging questions. They are comprehensive engagement, and I think there's good insights into what members are seeing on the ground in terms of access to services, where investment is needed. I think we need to go back a bit onto the roads, local, regional, and indeed national as well, as I mentioned. So look, we'd be interested to hear your responses, and I'm conscious of time, and I want to thank you all for your continued engagement with the committee. So I'll have the floor.
Chairman, maybe an appropriate way forward would be if I first address the climate and set of green issues together. Yes. I'll then hand over to my colleague around the roads and then around disability.
Yes.
And then there are various other issues that are left, so I'll wrap up with them.
Okay,
if
that'll be great. Thank you very much.
Okay, around the question of sustainability and public transport, I suppose we take the view that of its nature, public transport is more accessible, is more sustainable, is more environmentally friendly and greener and better for the livability of cities and areas than private car use. And there's a considerable level of state investment in providing rural transport, not just now, but providing public transport, not just now, but also into the future. There's several motivations for that, and one of the motivations is, I suppose, what you might broadly term a green agenda and a policy direction towards having more sustainability and environmentally friendly approaches to life in Ireland. On the question of public transport fleet and the type of fleet that's appropriate to bring forward, let's start out with looking at emissions. Transport emissions account for 20% of Ireland's emissions, and just 1% public transport. So it is very low. And in one way you could argue, well, does it matter as to whether you make it greener than it is already? And as some of the members of the committee correctly pointed out, the levels of standards of transport vehicles as they move up the Euro classes over time. We were at Euro 3, 4, 5, we're now at Euro 6 is the norm nowadays. They become more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, have fewer emissions, better kind of exhaust profiles. So it is getting better all the time. But that said, there is a leadership role that has to be taken in relation to the public transport sector. While its own emissions might not be at a tipping point as to where Ireland is generally around emissions, the fact that there's so much public funding going into the area suggests that it should be leading rather than following, and should be demonstrating and showing to other parts of the economy, particularly the private use, the private personal car use and the private business vehicle use, whether it's heavy-duty vehicles or lighter duty goods vehicles. So there are initiatives around this. There was in the National Development Plan a commitment that by the middle of next year there will be no more purchases of diesel-only fleet for urban public transport services. So that's set in a very strong signal. One of the things that we're doing within the department, which is going to support that, not just for the immediate purchases ahead, but over the coming times, is that in addition to researching these issues internationally and looking at both the evidence that there is from other jurisdictions and what they've done, how they've got on, the experience they've had, whether they've gone on a straight road or they've done about turns on the way. But we want to see, well, not just that and not just what are the manufacturers telling us. Let's test it for ourselves, and let's test it on our roads and our bus routes and our hilly routes and flat routes and routes where you have to stop 10 times when you're just going down a street because of traffic or traffic lights or whatever. And that's a piece of work that the department has commissioned. It's a set of trials that are going to be rolling out. They're going to be starting within a few weeks, certainly before the end of the year, and they'll be running for a fixed number of weeks. And there's...
Just one thing. You're saying from next year on there will be no diesel-only buses. What do you mean by that? Is it diesel electric they're going to buy after that, or is it electric only? Second of all, a few weeks doesn't test anything in the line of how a vehicle performs, because if you're on electric, the battery is 3 years you need to be testing it for. And thirdly, are you aware, and I presume you are, that on the budget you get that you need an automatic 20% rise, because if you buy a biodiesel or electric diesel bus or vehicle that has 2 different types in it, you will get 8 buses instead of 10 one time. That's going by the prices of them. So have you a budget laid out that's 20% more? Are you confident that it won't be a pig in a bag you're buying, that weeks won't test anything? I've had machinery myself all my life, and weeks doesn't test something. It's 3 years down the road when you know, or maybe 5 years, when you know that something was either going to rob you or make you.
Okay. I suppose I'll incorporate those points into what we're doing. Yes, the technologies, what's called alternative fuel technologies, and the types of buses, they are more expensive at the moment than conventional diesel buses, so it will cost more. Government's aware of that, and government has been aware of that in making its commitment that it would move away from diesel-only buses. Now, we haven't got into the space of prescribing what precise technologies should be purchased. And what I was trying to explain is that there's horses for courses in this. There's a number of technologies available. There's hybrid electric, there's fully hybrid, which is, 2 types. It's part electric, part diesel or something else. There's fully electric by battery or by plug-in. There are other technologies like hydrogen, and there's CNG, compressed natural gas. And what's going to be tested over these trials is a range of buses, and trying to see which ones suit which types of routes better. If you have a very hilly area, is the technology that's appropriate for that the same technology that you're going to run on a nice flat run? Or if you're in a very congested urban area where you're stopping and starting a lot, which of the technologies are working better? So the point of this trial, and this isn't the be-all and end-all, it's one component of the research that we're doing, but I'm talking about it because it's very proximate. We're going to be doing it over the next few weeks, is just running those different types of buses under simulated conditions on real Irish bus routes. So these aren't bus routes in some foreign city where we're getting told about it. It's stuff that we know about ourselves, and actually measuring what's coming from the tailpipe. So gathering and testing what's coming from the tailpipe, and not just relying on what manufacturers are telling you. And it's an element, why I'm describing it is, it's an element of what the department is doing in a practical way to support a trial and a testing of innovative stuff where we just don't know what's the absolute definitive best answer. And it would seem that nobody really does know. And the points that members of the committee are raising around this are very real. There is considerable experience that has been built up internationally, but it's not entirely conclusive. So it's trying to add to it with our own analysis and understanding, and to help inform decisions so that better purchasing decisions are made over time. And indeed, as we go into the future, we would expect technologies to develop further. So we don't expect that we will at one point in time come up with the right answer, and that will forever after be the approach that has to be slavishly followed.
Can I just ask you one question, very brief? That you have said that you're getting rid of diesel. Euro 6 engine, it is proved without doubt, and when you do your tests you can do it, is the same as gas at the moment in emissions. Why are you testing the gas, the other ones, and that automatically you have said you're ruling out the Euro 6, when maybe down the road the Euro 7 could be even better than gas? Why have you made that decision?
What government has decided, and it's a policy of government, is that we should move away from diesel-only fleet for urban areas and for purchasing new diesel-only fleet for urban areas. What's going to be measured and what's relevant isn't just the carbon emissions, but also the nitrous oxide emissions, the SOx emissions, the sulfur oxide emissions, the particulate matter. And there's impacts on two fronts, and we want to try to get measures of them both. One is the climate impact, which largely comes from carbon, and the other one is the air quality impact. And air quality impacts are more acute in areas of congestion and of higher proximity of people and buildings and all the rest of it. So you might have technologies that in a rural or very dispersed area would not cause the same impact in air quality means, but in more congested areas would.
I'm conscious now we could delve very deeply into all of this debate, and I'm conscious of that, but I'm also conscious of the time. But could I just ask, just following on from what Deputy Fitzmaurice has said, in your evaluations, like, have you a time frame? Like, when would you expect to report on your various experimental testing? Is it the end of this year? Is it the spring of next year? When would you hope?
As far as I know, we're starting this within the coming weeks. I think around late November, beginning of December. It's going to be running for a number of weeks with outcomes coming out after that. I would be thinking probably early spring where we'd be getting the initial outputs, and they'll help to inform purchasing decisions going forward. There may need to be further analysis.
And will you also take into account the associated infrastructure that would be required to support that type of technology? Because obviously, like, if there was gas infrastructure that's required to run gas vehicles, it's going to bring a bigger demand if we don't traditionally have that infrastructure.
Yeah.
Then, so I think it is important that that's evaluated as well, I think,
And one of the issues would be, the reliability and what level of recharging is required.
And I'm conscious there's another committee that can deal with this in far more depth,
Yes,
but I think
yeah.
it is of interest to us in terms of connectivity and fuel technology and all the rest of it. So we would be interested as a committee to hear the outcome of that testing when it is completed.
I would be interested in the testing in general, in terms of where you're going to do it.
Yeah.
In terms of around the country where you're going to do your testing, and what parameters you have in terms of how you're going to do it. Be quite interesting.
I think it's largely Dublin and Cork on particular routes, and the routes have been chosen because of the variation between them and the range of testing conditions that you can capture.
Okay.
It's been run in conjunction with Dublin Bus and with Bus Éireann, and there's a company that has been taken on board to do the actual measurement, and they're working for the department in relation to that.
Okay, I'm anxious to hear responses on the roads investment, local, regional, national, rural link and disability issues as well. So if we could address those, yeah.
Certainly, Chairman. Just on the initial one that was mentioned, the initial two were the N4 and the N5. In terms of the N4, Collooney to Castle Baldwin, tenders have been received, and it's expected that that contract will get underway, be awarded and get underway prior to Christmas. The next one probably on the list is the N5 Westport to Turlock, and that's expected to be awarded next year. Excuse me. In terms of Balhadream to Scramogue, that's on the N5. That's recently gone to Bord Pleanála, so we're TII are awaiting the outcome in relation to that. They're not. Collooney to Castle Baldwin is.
No, but I'm talking about the Westport and as you Balhadream. Yeah,
Westport to Turlock is dual. Balhadream to Scramogue is single. The reason simply is it's a volume of traffic and HGVs. It's TII have to go to Bord Pleanála. They have to justify the land take. They have to justify the road, and they have to make a call on what, for the future design year, what capacity is needed. And
do you remember the roads assessment many years ago?
Yes.
The road needs assessment. Do you remember, there was a big book.
Indeed, yeah.
And a very interesting thing, if you get it out, it was proposed in that, if you remember, that the road from Athlone to Ballinasloe was the least traffic part of that road, and that should be single carriageway. Now, wouldn't it be a beaut out of Galway on the dual carriageway into the single carriageway and back onto the dual? Would it be within the policy remit of the department? The policy remit. You've over half the national primary routes already dualled. Primary, I forget what anybody is. Primary routes. Would it be within the remit of the department and government to say, hang on a second, all national primary major upgrades now dual? Now coming out of dual, the other one you've done up in Drummond, I think is.
Well, yeah,
is that within your remit?
Well, it is, to be honest. I mean, the government previously made a decision that, Dublin, Waterford, Limerick, Cork, Galway would be all dual carriageway. So there was some sections.
Was it just as well?
There was some sections of those whereby the traffic figures wouldn't have justified a dual carriageway, and but TII were able to use the government decision to go in and
why aren't we? I'm a believer in building for the future, not now. Not for the day. And if you're ever going to have balanced regional development, the big buzzword that's everywhere, that everyone is on about, well, you won't have it if a company is struggling, or if I'm behind a 35X on a road and some businessmen I'm trying to bring them down to get them to set up in Castlebar or be it Waterford or wherever in Ireland. I'm not I'm not just aiming at one place. Or go to Donegal. I spoke to a person that actually met their boss from America, hired a helicopter to bring them to Donegal because they were afraid that if they were on that road too long, that they'd pull the investment. And this is where it's not about the road. This is about people and jobs down the way and about bringing people to areas. And why we cannot make that decision. And if it's our business here, if listening from what you're saying, that we need to bring in something to make sure that we have dual carriageways. I'm not looking for a motorway everywhere, I'm not saying that. But that you can pass out some with a bit of comfort and that you're not stuck paying something all day. And that's what we're aiming at the moment. You cannot drive now. One time ago, and under the transport regulations now, you can't drive with the tractor on the hard shoulder. It's illegal. So you have to stay abroad on the road. So now you're left that you're blocking everything. So as a consequence of our own legislation, and I see it day in, day out, and frustration builds and people takes risks. If you're behind something and you might go at the wrong time, crash. And why we don't just do, like, for the sake of the extra few pound when you're CPO on ground and when you're putting it down and when you're getting it ready, I just can't understand. And if it's, you tell us now, if it's our business as public reps to get this through, that's going to be policy on them roads, as Deputy Cuív, we're not looking for it everywhere, but that you have a structure right around north, south, east and west to tie into the likes of the A5, to tie in from Aucknacloy onto the M1 and have a vision for our country to give everyone from Donegal down to the bottom of Wexford over to the bottom of Kerry, give them a chance that they could bring industry and also that they can go from A to B. I drive Dublin every day, and the greatest road that has ever been built is the Dublin-Galway road. It's a credit. And that's what gets people moving.
Okay, Deputy, I want to hear the response. So I think your points are well made, in fairness, and they are very...
I think we should just clarify, though, what we're talking about. We're talking about national primaries. So you nearly got the N11 done.
Yes. Yeah, because...
well, you've got the N1 done, the M1 done.
Yeah.
M2, you've a little bit done. But at least you can go up the M1 and go across. M3, for some reason, it's great down to Virginia, and then you run into the bog. N4, you get to Mullingar, and then you run into the bog. N5, same thing. N6 done, N7 done, N8 done, N9 done, N10, 11, N9 and 10 done, because it's the same road now, right? And N11 is nearly done. Now, what that leaves you to do is Waterford to Cork, Waterford to Limerick. Cork to Limerick, which you're going to do, and that'll be dual anyway. Cork to Killarney, Killarney back in at Adair. And then you have the whole south of the country done, effectively, and a little bit in Wexford. And then you start, and you go into the black hole of Ireland, which is that you have to get from Tuam to Letterkenny. And there's one measure of a road, count to 50k speed limit on it. Now, as the chair knows, if he drives from Waterford to Limerick, the last 10 miles into Limerick, it's all 50k, 50k, 50k. She'll drive you nuts. Now, I run transport. The wear and tear of vehicles and things and all that caper is absolutely phenomenal. So, let's turn the question round. Do you think that the government that made the decision on the M8, the M7, 8, 9 and 6, and the whole way up to the border, made a good decision when they said, forget about patches, do the thing out of face and be done with it? But that good government, policy decision making.
I think in retrospect, it was the right decision, yeah.
So let's just do it for the rest of them. And I forgot one road that's of vital importance. Because there's only, all the M, am I right in thinking that a national primary is defined by being a number N or M under 50?
Up to and including 50, yeah.
Yeah. So there's very few of them in it.
So, yeah, but in terms of, there are other projects which are in for appraisal, and this is probably where some of the N24 and N25 come in. Firstly, the N4, Mullingar to Longford, and I suspect that probably would be a dual carriageway anyway. So There's also the N4 Carrick-on-Shannon to Drummond. And then when you get to the N25, obviously New Ross has been done. The N11, the PPP Gorey to Enniscorthy has been done, and the N30 off it. And in terms of appraisal, the N24 Waterford Care to Limerick Junction is one of the projects which TII are to appraise. The cross-section isn't decided yet, and it's early stages yet. The Waterford to Glenmore, the N25, that's a further one to be appraised, and also Carrick-Toohill to Middleton. So they are in the NDP as projects to be appraised.
Okay.
And in terms of Ballyvourney to Macroom, there was mentioned earlier, the N22, that is both it and the Westport job are to start construction next year.
Okay, on disability access then, and what was the other issues that we spoke about? Rural link and local link.
Okay, I'll cover the disability access. Senator Dolan raised a number of issues. The UN Convention in Article 9 you raised, as you probably know, we do have the implementation plan from our Accessibility Consultative Committee, and that contains all the actions under public transport that we're required to do, arising from National Disability Inclusion Strategy, the Comprehensive Employment Strategy, and so on. That's published on our website, and there are a lot of actions, as you know. I mean, there's some good successes recently, but there's a lot of retrofitting to be done in relation to disability access. In relation to the National Transport Authority you mentioned, and this issue of engagement with National Disability Authority on things like delivery for buses and so on. Yeah, I mean, that certainly is an issue, and I know we've had discussions in the past about that, and we've had discussions with the National Transport Authority. They did engage with the National Disability Authority, and they were able to make changes to delivery, particularly in relation to visually impaired people, and that was done. One of the other things they're looking to do is to appoint a dedicated accessibility officer, which they don't have at the moment. I think that would be a useful thing that they might do. And provide for, let's not be honest, better engagement with the disability sector. We have our own disability accessibility committee. Each of the transport operating companies have one as well, and perhaps that's something we need to look at as well with regard to the National Transport Authority. You mentioned as well the bus stops. And yes, that is an issue, and it's part of our retrofit programme. As you know, we have a significant capital programme over the next number of years to deal with the antiquated infrastructure that we have in some cases. So it's been rolled out on a route by route basis. So we've looked at, and we've done Dublin Donegal, Dublin Letterkenny. The plan by the NTA is that they will have accessible bus stops in 43 towns with a population of over 5,000 people by 2021. So that's a stop in each direction, so it's 86 accessible bus stops. You asked about local link as well. I think it's about 69% of local link services are defined as either fully or partially accessible. At the moment, the NTA are re-tendering all of the over 1,000 routes on the local link service. One of the conditions they're putting on that is that within 2 years, all of those services must be wheelchair accessible. So the other 31%, let's say, all of the existing ones must remain accessible. The other 31% have to be accessible within 2 years. On commercial operators, this is certainly an issue, as you mentioned, on coaches. Bus Air and Expressway has to be wheelchair accessible. In relation to the private operators, that is not there, and there's no requirement on the commercial bus operators to provide wheelchair accessible coaches.
You don't put a requirement on them.
That's
the nub of my question.
There is none.
Yeah.
So the NTA they're going to publish proposals for consultation shortly, which will set out minimum accessibility standards for commercial public transport services. We're going to do that consultation towards the end of this year, as I understand it, and that will guide future ways of dealing with the licensing of commercial operations, and whether or not, as you say, there should be a requirement on them to provide accessible coaches.
Could I just a very brief... I just cannot see it, that there can't be, if there have been contract to provide a public service when we've actually decided that these services should be accessible. There are accessible buses. Surely there is no other decision but that it should be done. The only row should be about how quickly it would happen.
In this case, we're talking about here the licensing of commercial bus operations. I mean, the NTA has a certain role.
To provide the public service.
Well, they also provide public service obligation contracts for Dublin Bus, Bus Éamon, and a lot of private operators are using those as well. They must be wheelchair accessible. But in the commercial sphere, there is no requirement currently, but that is something certainly the NTA are looking at.
Have you taken my question on the length of the buses, that if you're it's going to actually rise the local link, the prices that will go in. You have to have it wheelchair accessible. It's 6,000 per for being able. It's 12,000 in most buses now, and it's down to the length of a bus. So if you don't have to have it for bringing a yank around the country, and depends on the length of your bus, you'll get the VAT back. Should there not be something incentivised, or can ye not do that with the Department of Finance to incentivise something? First of all, you'll have a better standard of bus. Second of all, they will be more accessible for people with disabilities. To give the VAT back when it's down to the only criteria at the moment is the length of the bus, and if you're an inch one way or the other, then you're out.
I suppose in relation to that, Deputy, I'm not familiar with VAT rules in or around transport services. They don't come within the remit of our department, but from what you're saying, it is something that affects the people who are trying to provide transport services. So it's real in their world. And it's something that I suppose straddles it. It happens to be transport, but it's VAT law, which is tax. It's administered by the Revenue Commissioners, and the rules are set by the Minister for Finance.
Would it not be a way that you could go to them and say, look, there's a problem here, we need a break?
Well, I'm not aware of the problem, Deputy, other than that you have raised it this evening. So we'll talk to them, we'll see what the matter is.
Show you the criteria.
I think there's a number, just to interrupt, sorry for interrupting again, but there is a number of genuine concerns that members have that are affecting access to rural transport and making rural transport work. And that's the specific remit of this committee, is to try and identify those barriers or blockages or where funding is required. So I know you're noting it and taking it on board, but I think, in a general sense, it is important that department officials like yourselves hear the concerns of the members.
Yes.
And if you, in your engagements with the various state agencies, and we'll have them in before us and have opportunity as well, I think it is important that we flag this. If we want rural transport and rural access and rural connectivity to work, well, then we're going to have to address the concerns that members are raising. And I think that's the general gist of it. But just to try and wrap up, if we could have some...
Chair, very quick issue. First of all, let's flag up that there needs to be a policy that services are provided late in the evening. Now, the second thing that we need to maybe focus on, we'll be commemorating the first Dáil on the 21st of January. The election took place on the 15th, I think, of December, and the results weren't in until the end of the year, and it was Christmas. Yeah. And they managed to do it in 21 days. They set up a Dáil, they had translation, they had stenography, they had a whole thing in place within 21 days. Now, just to compare that massive, monumental decision that we're here commemorating in this particular establishment 100 years ago, I approached Bus Éamon about getting late night services to Carrow, but it could have been to any Carrow in the country, because the last bus leaves Galway at 6 o'clock. And Bus Éamon in the early spring put a proposal to the NTA, and that service was meant to be in place in September, and Bus Éamon assured me they're ready to rock and roll. And will you explain to me, if they can set up the first dial in 21 days, how it has taken, and they tell me now it's going to be January, before they just put in a revised timetable in that Bus Éireann have proposed, so that we can get this service in place. Now, will somebody explain to me what's gone wrong in 100 years? When we can set up a parliament in 21 days and we can't reconfigure a bus timetable to provide a vital service. And it's taken 8, 9, 10 months, whatever it's taken. Now, something's gone absolutely crazy wrong in this country. Nothing seems to get done. Now,
I'm going to interrupt you now. You've made that point well. It's an operational matter for Bus Éireann.
no, sorry, the Minister, sorry.
No,
when I was the Minister...
Schedules and timetables is an operational matter for Bus Éireann.
That's not the point, sorry. What is the point? The question is this. The point isn't that. I'm not asking the department to interfere to setting a timetable. I'm asking the department what steps are you going to take to make sure the agencies under your remit
that's a fair point.
efficiently and make decisions immediately and stop the pettifogging for months over little things.
Thank you. Now look, I'm just conscious of time. I'm going to move on. We've all had adequate opportunity to engage.
One of the questions wasn't responded to.
Yeah, I'm going to list them. I'm going to list them here. Yeah, I'm going to try and get to them. So there were specific questions I'll ask the officials. One, Deputy Fitzmaurice, you had one about the Western Rail Corridor.
10T Western Rail Corridor.
Right. We had two questions that I'd like to hear answered for Deputy Healy-Rae. He asked about the age of buses, where there was 20 years plus. He was saying in the private sector it's not allowed, and is it the case in the public sector that 20 years plus buses are allowed? And he also raised a question about DOE test centres and access to those in the regions. I think that's important. Senator Dolan, you raised specific questions around Article 9 UN.
Well, no, that's been dealt with, and we can pick up on that. But the disability awareness training, and I've made comments and I was looking for a response, that the 24 hours wait, I think is not acceptable, but it's there at the moment. But people are still routinely ringing up, booking it, and it doesn't happen for them. Even though the bus is there, it can be made accessible, the train is there, the ramp's going. There's something horrendous, and it needs to be a zero tolerance policy when someone has booked for a day and they still can't get the bus or the train.
We've got that. We'll try and get a response to that. And finally, just for the officials' information, we devoted a full meeting here in regards to a flooding issue on the Galway to Limerick railway line at Ballycar. And I understand there's still no resolution. And we had engagements with all of the agencies, but none of them are taking ownership. And I've just asked the department officials if they have any information in regards to finding a resolution for that particular issue. Again, a primary railway route in our country from Galway to Limerick, two of our main cities identified under Ireland 2040. Flooding which shuts down the railway, I think it's unacceptable in this day and age. And if there was some information on that, or at least to bring it to your attention, we'd appreciate a response on that as well. Okay, so with final answers now, and
Chair,
thank you very much.
I gather you prefer a whistle-stop tour of answers to
responses. Brief specific responses, if that's possible.
Yeah, to use a technical transport phrase. And if you want more, then ask me another question. I'll go backwards through them. Flooding in Ballycar, we are aware of that. There does seem to be progress being made on it, in that the range of bodies that are involved are working together under the leadership and bringing together of Clare County Council. Irish Rail is involved with it, as are some consultants who are looking at the issue. The issue seems to be one of flooding in the area. It affects the rail line, but it also affects other things in the area, and they're looking at what would be the best approach to bring forward. But I think what's heartening about it is that things do seem to be moving, in that they are working together, cooperating and looking jointly at what's the best way forward. So we await to see what the outcome of that will be. In relation to school buses, that was the question that Deputy Healy-Rae had about 20 years or older, depending on whether they were operated by Bus Éireann or on contract to Bus Éireann. The school bus system in its entirety is a matter for the Minister for Education and his department. Bus Éireann operates it for the Minister as his agent, but it's not a matter in which our department takes a role or would have any knowledge. Test centres for the testing of heavy vehicles and bus centres, I don't know the answer to that, so we can see and find out. It's not in the public transport space, so I'm not aware of it within my part of the department. It may be in another department.
To respond
we
to the
will,
committee
and we'll reply to the clerk and let him know whether it's ours or someone else's. Western Rail Corridor, there's a commitment in the programme for government that the costings of the proposals for extension of the Western Rail Corridor northwards from the existing part of the project that was opened in 2010, that would be examined and looked at, and in the meantime that the programme for government also commits that there would be no development that would preclude its bringing into service for rail purposes in the future.
She is doing the review.
What the government decided in the summer was that the best approach, because it is more than a decade since the project was looked at before and cost-ins were put in place, and those cost-ins are affected by a number of things. There's a new road running along it. There has been the opening of what was identified by the McCann report as the most potentially economic part of it. That part has already opened. So what government decided was that business case just needs to be revisited. It's not robust enough to take a decision on it at the moment.
My memory was that the most viable part of that line actually was Athenry to Tuam. And it's my clear memory of when it came to us for cabinet decision, because I remember one of my colleagues actually saying we shouldn't have done Ennis to Athenry, we should have done Athenry to Tuam, but we'll check that one out.
My recollection, Deputy, from reading it, is that the McCann report identified that the piece that's already been built is the piece that connects Limerick and Galway.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And that the economic benefit that you get from that is stronger than the potential economic benefit you get from the others, because none of those possible future phases would be connecting areas that are already centres of such economic activity and population density. So the return and the benefit to come from it wouldn't be as strong. Anyhow, back to the Deputy's question, who's doing it?
Who's doing it?
Yeah.
Where are they at? My understanding is it was nearly done. When was it being done?
Sorry. Irish Rail have been told by government to go and do that review. They're out to tender at the moment for assistance, economic expertise in help and technical in helping them to put together a business case. We expect it will be a couple of months. Alongside doing the business case, which is, I suppose, the technical financial procedures that are required to be done in accordance with the Public Spending Code, Irish Rail have also been told to go and do a consultation, because there's a wide variety of views as to what is the best use of that alignment, whether it be for rail or for Greenway or for something else or nothing at all.
Just wait 1 second. If you read your statement that I read back to you, that you're going to basically, the priority is to look after existing.
Oh, yeah.
Where does the money come out?
Can I respond to that? In relation to that, what I said was that was the priority that was set when times were hard, when we had to cut very deeply into capital budgets, and we said, what's the best thing to do? Well, it's hunker down and keep the existing very extensive network running. What's happening now that there is more capital funding coming forward and profiled under the National Development Plan is that we can do that. We've reached the steady state of keeping the existing networks going, and we can do targeted additional projects. A number of those projects are specifically set out in the NDP, like the Metro, the Bus Connects, the DART expansion, but there is scope in there for more. What's happening about the Western Rail Corridor is government has told Irish Rail, go off and do an up-to-date, robust business case and come back to us with it. And when they come back, in accordance with the Programme for Government Commitment, there is going to be an independent review and peer assessment of the Irish Rail case, because there does seem to be a significant degree of dispute as to the robustness and the quality of figures that are being put
in your
forward
estimation, how
by
long does
different
this
parties.
take? This one to the other to the other?
Well, Irish Rail are getting consultants on board
Well, I know,
around now.
As well as costing money, they take a long time. When will we know one way or the other?
We'd be expecting that consultants' report to be coming probably within a matter of 3 months from when they start working.
When they start working, but when will that be?
Well, probably end of the year, I would imagine, if you
March.
in or around. They have to do a consultation as well, but they can run that alongside. They don't have to be sequential, they can be concurrent, and come back to government. At that point, government will make assessment as to what's the appropriate thing to do.
Where are we on the 10T?
On the 10T, there is a commitment in the programme for government that a concept that's called the Western Arc, which is the concept you referred to, would be put forward by government to the European Commission, proposing its inclusion as part of the core network of 10T. There's work underway in the department in relation to that.
Excuse me, but nothing has been done. The files have been requested from you. It was committed that within a certain length of time of the government starting, that this would be done.
Excuse me.
And from people that has requested files, from information received on it, the department has done nothing on it. Why is there a blank on the west of Ireland under the 10T?
My understanding is that the approach is being prepared at the moment, and it's expected that something can be progressed to ministerial level within the coming short few months. What would be happening is at EU level, there's a requirement to review the entirety of the 10T network throughout the European Union, because it's a network of, what would you say, core routes for transport, rail, road, airports, ports, to review that, and that review has to be done at European level by 2023. So it has to be done by then.
Yeah, but just
so
clear
we
on
would
this,
be input in.
I was actually in at the programme
that.
for government,
yes.
And the commitment was that it would be within 6 months. I'm going to look up the programme for government.
It was very short.
Yes. Why isn't it done in that length of time? Why are we talking about it 2.5 years later, and we're talking about 2023? That commitment was given under the programme for government. Why isn't it done by your department?
It's one of a number of priorities that the department
But obviously
has
it's not that big of a priority when it's the west of Ireland, because every other priority has been done. There was a rail put in going out towards Navan, and it was done, even though it wouldn't stack up in a business case. But when you go to the west of Ireland, the one thing that was put into the programme for government, I know people that has tried to FOI information of your department, and they have been dilly-dallied around with not giving the information. No file. They have requested files. There is nothing on the file. There is nothing to say that we have tried to do this 10T. And we keep getting blacked off on this specific issue because it's the west of Ireland.
If I could explain, maybe, Chairman.
Final response on this. I think we've exhausted this particular issue, and it is something we will be revisiting, Deputy. But a final response on this particular matter.
There's a big piece of work that has been done that was very significant to the context and to the quality of the case that you could put forward for a 10T designation of that arc. And that was the work that's been done and only completed in recent months around the development of a national planning framework and the development of a national development plan. If you go to Europe and you're looking for inclusion of particular corridors or routes as part of a core network across Europe, you have to give as good a case as you possibly can give. And one of the things that bolsters your position in making that case is if you can say, look, here's my national plan for developing my country, and as part of that you can see that we are giving strength to building up networks across these regions. We have.
So there was no big deal. We were in it up to 2011 or 12. So we had the case before that.
We are already within the comprehensive network. The issue is whether we would be upgraded further to the core network. The comprehensive network is still a good place to be. The question is whether we can step into.
Is there money out of this? Because otherwise we're only talking poppycock. My understanding of 10 T's was meant to be dropping money all over the place to everybody. But is there any money for the comprehensive network?
First of all, to do a study, you get funding. And second of all, if you're doing rail and road, if you're joining the likes of Derry, you have to join 2 countries together. Really.
Yeah, it's difficult to give a short answer to this, so I'll give a very cautious one. There's various levels of funding that you can get, but inclusion in a network doesn't, in a comprehensive or a core network, does not automatically give you money. It means you can then compete for funding calls. And so you still have to compete for projects and compete with projects all across Europe.
Ms Hanlon, if you could provide the committee with a briefing update on this particular aspect in more detail.
We'll ask our colleagues who do that
would you mind,
give you a short
if you could ask them and we'll circulate that to
and just
members.
one thing.
I'm moving on, Deputy. I'm really sorry.
I put on this, what I thought was a simple question one day to the department. I asked how much EU money had been funneled through the Department of Transport for transport projects, roll and rate, since 2000 to 2010. And instead of giving me the answer in a thing, what I was referred to was every agency under your remit, and they all give the answers in different ways, right? And I have to now sit down someday and spend a week trying to put the stuff together. Is it possible to find out how much money came channeled through your department from the EU for road and rail infrastructure? That's all I was looking for, from 2000 to 2010.
Can I give a very short answer to that might help elucidate it and explain why there was such a complicated reply given? Generally, if we're doing projects, we fund them up front from the Exchequer. Afterwards, we apply for EU funding. So you can get approval for EU funding, but you wouldn't be hanging on waiting for that cash flow to come.
Sorry, but no disrespect.
So, Deputy, please no interruptions now. Go ahead.
So, just in general terms, we get the money from the Exchequer through the Department's vote to our agencies to go off and build whatever it is they've been authorised to build.
Yeah.
And then, as they do that, build the project, pay contractors or people who've provided the project, they then fill out claim forms, as it were, to make it very simple, send them off to Europe. In due course, the money comes through. They've already got funded by the Exchequer through the Department's vote. So what happens is those funds flow typically back into the Exchequer. They don't necessarily flow through our department.
Well, with no disrespect.
That's what happens in the main. There are a small number of exceptions.
Like my experience of EU funds was, I said, leader, exactly as you're saying, you spent out your money and you gave it to the leader group. And then the money came back from Europe, you made your claims every quarter or 6 months, and you got an appropriation in aid. And at the bottom of the estimate, you see the appropriation in aid. Now, I could have gone out and got my estimates and done the appropriation in aid, but there can be other things thrown into appropriation in aid that's not EU money.
Yeah.
And I couldn't disaggregate it. But all the repayment surely came back in through the department as appropriations in aid.
Not anymore, Deputy. I think on the whole that approach has changed. The monies, as far as I
well, if
recall,
you paid it out to
tend to go back to the central Exchequer rather than
and
flow
they give it
through
back
the
to
vote
you,
as
because
aid.
otherwise, would they not give it back to you as an appropriation in aid?
I don't think that's happening anymore. I think the flow of funding was simplified a number of years ago in order to streamline it and be more
efficient.
This is important. I have a reason I need to know. So you're saying if I went to finance and asked a question, they could tell me? Maybe you'll find out from me.
Well, certainly they'd know the aggregates. I don't know if they'd be dividing it by project or areas.
I wasn't interested. I was only wanted an aggregate figure.
We're moving on. I'm trying to focus on the specific questions in relation to...
there's a big relevance to this.
No, I know there's relevance, and it's something we will come back to, Deputy. Senator Dolan had some questions. If we could respond to those, then I think we'd be satisfied.
Yeah. Senator Dolan asked about the period of advance notice for travelling on public transport. On the rail side, DART have reduced the notice from 24 hours to 4 hours on the DART services. That's actually going to be rolled out as well to the Minute line. I think that's in place already, and on the Northern line shortly. And I'm coming to the buses. Yes.
No, my particular question was, when people give notice, it should be as rare as hen's teeth that it doesn't work for them.
Agreed.
But that's not what happens a lot of the time. Totally unacceptable.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we are assessing how the pilot was run with Irish Rail, and we do encourage people, if there are issues, to contact the company, contact ourselves, and if you have any evidence, Senator, of people who haven't
my
had...
My point is that people with disabilities shouldn't be routinely having to make complaints about something that they have been promised will happen. They've already had to stick in their craw that they have to give whatever, a day's notice or 4 hours notice. There is no excuse whatsoever that that doesn't work every time. That's my point. And who is going to crack the whip with those public companies on that? That's really, and to say that it comes back to the disabled person, that's again saying it's up to you to keep complaining every time it doesn't work for you. When the public system has said, the public system has picked the number of hours, the 24 hours or the 4 hours. We haven't picked it, we picked 0. We would pick rock up and get on that bus or train like anyone else. It's the public system has put in that backstop. So that's really the
just
point.
As a follow-on from that, to ask the officials, and I know it's the specific agencies or providers that are responsible, and we understand that, but I think it is important that the department officials, is there an evaluation of the service for vulnerable groups? Like, for example, if it's rail, bus or whatever, and I would include in that the elderly, the disabled and the young. Is there an evaluation of the service levels that are given to those? And if there is, what are the actions out of that evaluation to actually deal with the problems that the Senator has raised? It is a pertinent point, and I think it's something you should take on board.
Yeah, in relation to that, Chair, the NTA has contracts in place with these service providers, and within those contracts it has service levels that are required to be met. Now, I don't know, because I'm not familiar with the detail of the contracts, whether these type of items are part of those service levels, but I think that's something that we could have a useful discussion with the NTA about
that would be
as
helpful.
it comes to renew contracts.
I think we need to prioritise that as an evaluation of the services, and I think that the Senator is raising a very good pertinent point on that.
Could I propose something? That with the help of the department, that inside 3 months or whenever that we decide that together, that all outstanding issues, because I know you're anxious to get the meeting finished up, that all outstanding issues, if they're not answered, that the department would be willing to come back in and set aside a reasonable amount of time again to see where are we at with all these things that we've talked about.
I'm sure the officials would always be willing to come back to our committee to revisit some of these issues to see how progress has been made or not. Yep, we can do that. That's within our remit. Okay, so look, I'm going to take a wrap on that. I think we've covered, it was a long session, we've covered a lot of ground, and I think there has been valuable insights and indeed issues identified that are of concern to members, and we'd hope that you would take them on board in your various engagements with service providers, as we've said, where possible. And it is something we can come back to again, Deputy Fitzmaurice, into the future. So I want to thank all of our witnesses for your time and patience. I know it's run late here tonight, but I think it is a very important engagement in terms of where we're going with rural policy, in terms of access to public transport for our regions and for our rural areas, and it's something we as a committee will continue to engage on with the various stakeholders. So thank you all again.
Safe home, and if any of you take the Lewis out towards Sandyford, remember that line closed down. I was actually on a train in that line the week before it closed, and it closed down because they said it would never have a viable future. It's now the busiest rail line in the whole country.
Thank you, Deputy.
So when you try to butcher our Western Rail corridor,
so thank you again to the officials and safe home. Good morning.